She was 26 and emptied. No savings, no room, no promise, just a dust-filmed station wagon and $8 she had kept folded behind her expired hospital badge. And with that $8, she bought a forgotten fermentation cellar outside Fredericksburg in Gillespie County, Texas, where the place had fallen off maps in 1979. The north wall wept mineral water through its seams. The roof above the entry sagged toward the weeds. The county had condemned it since 1998 and was scheduled for demolition the following spring. But what nobody knew was that inside the largest 10-gallon crock at the far end of the cellar, beneath dry sand packed down by careful hands, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Maren Elise Klein had been bracing her whole life without knowing it. She learned early how to make her body narrow in doorways, how to stand where no one would have to step around her, how to listen for changes in a room before the room announced them. In the house where she was raised, silence was not peace, it was weather. It came before slammed cabinets, before the scrape of a chair, before her mother's careful voice asking if anyone wanted supper. They lived first on the edge of Kerrville, in a rental with cedar pollen on the screens and a carport that smelled of oil and sun-heated rubber. Behind the house, a strip of pale grass ran down toward a drainage ditch where Maren collected bottle caps, snail shells, pecan leaves, and the smooth grey stones she liked because they held coolness long after noon. She was an exact child. She counted stairs, measured rainwater in a chipped teacup, sorted buttons by shade and size. She could sit for an hour with a jar of cloudy vinegar, watching the mother rise and settle like a pale jellyfish in the amber liquid. Her grandmother said that meant Maren had been born with patient eyes. At school, teachers called her careful. At home, careful meant not asking for more than was already offered. It meant rinsing her glass and placing it upside down on the towel, lining up her shoes by the back door, keeping her notebooks hidden beneath the mattress because paper with blank lines had a way of inviting other people's opinions. Her mother, Elise, worked at a county dental office and came home with mint on her hands, a closed face, and the kind of tiredness that did not complain. She was pretty in an absent way, with fine brown hair always pinned too tightly and wrists so thin her watch slid down toward her hand. She loved Maren, but her love was often wrapped in fear, folded over until it became almost too small to recognize. Maren's father had left before her memory formed him into anything dependable. There were 2 photographs in a shoebox, both curling at the edges. In one, he stood beside a blue pickup, squinting into light. In the other, he held Maren as an infant, not looking at the camera but at something beyond the porch. No one spoke of him unless a form required his name. When Maren was 9, her mother married Lyle Haskett, a parts manager at a feed equipment company, a man who kept receipts in labelled envelopes and judged every living thing by its usefulness. Lyle was not loud at first. He did not need to be. He could lower a room's temperature by setting his keys on the counter with a certain precision. He liked the TV loud, the curtains closed, the thermostat untouched. He wore pressed jeans even on Sundays and cleaned his fingernails with the flat blade of his pocket knife. When he spoke to Maren, it was usually to correct the space she occupied. Move your chair, shut that drawer. Do not leave water in the sink. A person could spend years becoming less visible under a voice like that. The person who kept Maren from disappearing was her grandmother, Hannah Klein, though everyone in town called her Nora, because Texas had a way of sanding foreign names down until they fit inside ordinary mouths. Nora lived outside Fredericksburg in a low limestone house shaded by live oak and walnut trees. Her own grandmother had come from the German settlements of the hill country, carrying recipes written in a hand so narrow the letters looked like fence wire. Nora kept those pages in a flour tin above the stove, together with bay leaves, mustard seed, dill heads, and strips of linen washed soft from years of covering crocks. Every other Saturday, Elise drove Maren to Nora's house and left her there from morning until supper. Those were the days Maren remembered with the clearest light. The kitchen windows stood open. A ceiling fan turned with a tired tick. On the table, Cabbage rested in tight green heads, and cucumbers soaked in a basin of well water, their skins beaded and cold. Nora taught without announcing lessons. She set a scale on the table and had Maren weigh the vegetables after trimming. She showed her how to calculate sea salt by weight, 2% for cabbage, sometimes a little more for cucumbers if the weather had gone soft and damp. Maren learned to cut by sound, to hear when the knife met the board cleanly, to know when shredded cabbage had been massaged long enough because it turned glossy and gave up its own brine. "You do not force a living thing to keep," Nora said once, pressing a wooden tamper into Maren's hands. "You give it the right conditions and then you stay near." That sentence stayed with Maren before she understood why. At 9, it meant cabbage under salt, cucumbers beneath a stone weight, green tomatoes turning sharp and bright in a crock kept away from sunlight. Later it would mean breath, work, grief, and the part of a person that survives by being tended, not commanded. Nora's weekends had a rhythm that felt older than clocks. Morning was for washing and cutting, noon was for bread, butter, sausage, and slices of last year's pickled beets on a blue plate with a crack across the rim, afternoon was for the cellar. The cellar at Nora's house was not the one Maren would one day buy. Nora's cellar was modest, dug into a rise behind the kitchen, lined with stone, and cooled by the earth itself. On hot days, stepping into it felt like lowering your face to spring water. There were crocks on shelves, brown and salt glazed, some with blue numbers stamped beneath the handles. A vinegar barrel sat in the corner, breathing through its cloth cover. Braids of garlic hung from beams blackened by time. Dried thyme, sage, and chilepequin made the air both sharp and tender. Nora would lift the cloths and let Maren smell each jar. Not too close. Slow first. Vinegar could bite the eyes. Some crocks held sauerkraut in its 3rd week, pale and fragrant beneath a brine stone. Some held dilly beans with peppercorns and grape leaves to keep them crisp. One held sliced peaches fermenting toward vinegar, the surface alive beneath a veil that looked, to Maren, like moonlight caught in a bowl. "Food remembers hands," Nora told her. "That is why you wash them and why you use them." Maren did not know then that a craft could be a form of shelter. She only knew that in Nora's house nothing hurried her. If she spilled salt, Nora handed her the broom. If she sliced cabbage too thick, Nora set another leaf before her and showed her again. Mistakes were not evidence, they were part of the making. In the evenings, when Elise came to collect her, Maren would sit in the back seat with vinegar in her hair and dill beneath her fingernails, carrying jars wrapped in towels. Lyle complained about the smell. He said the house did not need peasant food clouding up the refrigerator. Elise would give a quick, frightened laugh and tuck the jars behind the milk. For years, Nora's rituals continued. Then the visits became less frequent. Lyle said gas cost money. Elise said weekends were complicated. Maren learned to call her grandmother from the hallway phone after school, twisting the cord around her wrist while Nora described what she was preserving that week. Quince vinegar in October, green tomato relish before frost, sauerkraut after the first real cold, apple scrap vinegar whenever the neighbor's tree dropped fruit faster than anyone could bake it. When Maren was 16, Nora fell in the garden beside her okra row and never fully came back to herself. The hospital smelled of bleach, plastic tubing, and mashed potatoes under a heat lamp. Maren sat beside the bed and held her grandmother's fingers, which had grown thin but still bore the faint scent of garlic no soap had ever completely removed. Nora died at dawn 3 days later, while the window was turning blue. After the funeral, everything that had seemed kept became suddenly available to people who did not understand it. Nora's house went to a cousin with debts. The crocks were sold at a yard sale before Maren knew the sale was happening. The flour tin of handwritten recipes vanished with a box of kitchen linens. The wooden tamper, the brine stones, the German Bible with pressed herbs between Ecclesiastes and Isaiah, the blue plate, the linen covers, all of it passed into other hands or dumpsters or the careless mouths of resale shops. Maren found one cracked saucer beneath the porch steps and carried it home wrapped in her sweater. Lyle said it was trash. She kept it anyway. The years after Nora became narrow and practical, Maren studied hard because studying was a door no one in the house could lock from the outside. She went to nursing school on grants, loans, night classes, and the habit of endurance. She learned anatomy, pharmacology, wound care, charting systems, and how to place her own hunger behind someone else's pain. Hospitals, for all their fluorescent severity, made sense to her at first. They had protocols, they had exact measurements, they had work that mattered. By 22, she was a licensed nurse working nights in San Antonio, living in a rented room near the interstate, sleeping while the city baked around her. Night shift altered the body in quiet ways. Daylight became something seen through blinds. Meals lost their names. Coffee went cold before she drank it. Her hands grew chapped from sanitizer. Her face learned the blank, gentle expression worn by people who must remain calm while alarms ring. For 4 years, she kept going. Then came the winter when everything thinned at once. The unit was short, 3 nurses. Patients waited in hallways. Medication carts jammed. The charge nurse cried in the supply room and came out with her jaw set. Maren reported a patient safety violation after a confused man was left unmonitored beside a bed with the rails down. He fell before morning and broke his hip. Her direct supervisor, Dr. Elaine Voss, did not thank her for reporting it. Voss was a woman of smooth suits and clipped vowels, with silver-rimmed glasses she removed whenever she wanted someone to feel studied. She called Maren into an office with no window and a framed print of bluebonnets above a locked file cabinet. "You need rest," Maren said, because she had practiced the sentence in the bathroom mirror. "The unit needs more staff. I need leave before I make an error I can't take back." Voss folded Maren's written request once, exactly down the middle. "What you need," she said, "is perspective." The leave was denied. The next schedule gave Maren 5 consecutive nights, 1 day off, then 3 more. When she objected, Voss told her that abandoning the unit would be documented. There were words like reliability, professionalism, record. They sounded clean, they landed dirty. Maren lasted 11 more shifts. On the final night, a storm pressed against the hospital windows, and rain dragged city light down the glass in long wavering lines. A patient in room 412 coded just before 3. The team worked with the hard, practiced urgency of people trying to hold a life inside a failing body. Maren compressed, counted past syringes, heard the physician call time, and then stood for several seconds with one glove torn and sweat cooling under her collar. Afterward, she went to the staff bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the closed toilet lid until the automatic light clicked off. In the dark, her phone buzzed with a message from Lyle. Her mother had been using Maren's room for storage. They needed her remaining boxes moved by the end of the month. If she did not come get them, he would clear the space himself. She did not cry. She washed her hands until the torn place near her thumb opened again. 2 mornings later, Maren signed the resignation form. Because she resigned instead of taking approved leave, the benefits office explained what she would lose with the patient neutrality of people reading policy from a screen, accrued seniority, retirement matching not yet vested, certain protections attached to continued employment. The words came one after another and settled around her like cold ash. She packed her room in San Antonio and drove to her mother's house with 2 boxes of uniforms, a duffel bag, Nora's cracked saucer, and a cardboard file of nursing papers she could not yet bear to throw away. The eviction happened on a Thursday afternoon in late October under a sky the color of dirty wool. Lyle had already carried most of her boxes to the carport, not set them down, carried them out. There was a difference. Her winter coat lay across a lawn chair with one sleeve dragging in the dust. Her nursing shoes sat beside a bag of kitchen trash. The cracked saucer had been placed on top of a box labelled MISC in Lyle's square handwriting. Maren stood by the carport post. Her mother remained inside the screen door, one hand pressed flat against the mesh, her face dim behind it. Lyle held up Maren's expired hospital badge between 2 fingers. The plastic had gone cloudy at the edges. Her face in the picture looked younger, hopeful in the plain way of someone who still believed usefulness might protect her. "You cannot keep bringing failure into this house." 8 words. He dropped the badge into the top box as though returning a receipt. Maren looked at her mother then, not at Lyle. Her mother's eyes moved from the badge to Maren's hands, then down to the threshold. She did not open the door, she did not say her daughter's name. Her silence was not empty. It had weight, shape, and a history of choosing the safest wall to stand behind. Maren picked up the box with the saucer first. The cardboard bowed under the weight of books and papers. She carried it to her station wagon, set it on the back seat, then returned for the rest. Lyle watched from the carport. Her mother stayed behind the screen. When the last bag was loaded, Maren found $8 in the pocket of her winter coat, 1531s, soft bills, folded together. She did not remember putting them there. She drove away without looking in the rearview mirror until the house had turned into a pale shape behind cedar and dust. 6 weeks did not pass so much as wear her down by increments. The first night, she slept in her car behind a closed laundromat in Comfort, Texas, waking whenever headlights swept across the windshield. Her breath fogged the glass. At dawn, she bought coffee for 99 cents and filled a bottle in the restroom sink, careful not to meet the cashier's eyes too long. In Bern, she parked near a church with a signboard that said the harvest supper had been postponed. She slept with her keys threaded between her fingers, though no one came near the car except a tabby cat that crossed the hood at 3 a.m, leaving damp paw prints in the dust. She sold her spare pair of nursing shoes at a resale shop for $12. The woman behind the counter examined the soles, frowned at the scuffs, and gave Maren the bills without comment. That money bought peanut butter, crackers, 2 cans of soup, and a gallon of water. She kept the receipt because she had begun keeping proof that she had existed in places. In New Braunfels, she spent 3 nights in a Walmart parking lot among RVs, work trucks, and other cars, whose occupants lowered their seats after dark. She learned to park under light but not directly beneath it, to crack the window even when it was cold, to cover her lap with a grey blanket and make herself look like laundry. She used a public library bathroom to wash her hair in the sink before anyone else arrived, then dried it beneath the hand dryer in short bursts. Her money diminished in exact humiliating amounts: $2.18 for gas station oatmeal and a banana, $4 for enough fuel to move the gauge off empty, $1 for a day-old roll from a bakery in Sagging, where the woman at the counter added a second roll to the bag and pretended not to notice Maren noticing. By the 3rd week, the station wagon had begun making a belt sound on cold starts. By the 4th, Maren had learned which parks locked their restrooms at dusk and which did not. She slept once beneath a picnic pavilion outside Blanco because rain had found its way through the wagon's rear seal and soaked her blanket. She woke before sunrise to deer moving through the wet grass, their bodies appearing and disappearing between cypress trunks like thoughts a person was not ready to have. She did not call her mother, she did not call the hospital, she did not call anyone from the unit. Shame made even familiar numbers seem like doors behind which people were already tired of her. In the 5th week, she went back toward the hill country because the land there had Nora's weather in it: limestone road cuts, live oak, fields cleared by German hands generations earlier, stone houses with deep porches, windmills turning with a patient metal sigh. Even in hunger, the place steadied her. On a cold Monday, she parked outside the Fredericksburg Pioneer Memorial Library and waited for it to open. Her gas tank was below an eighth. Her last food was half a sleeve of crackers wrapped in a napkin. The $8 from her coat pocket had survived because she had placed it behind her expired badge and made a rule that she would not spend it unless there was no other way to move. Inside the library, heat rose from floor vents and the air smelled of paper, dust, toner, and rain on wool coats. Maren sat at a computer beneath a framed photograph of Main Street from another century. She searched for nursing jobs first, then caregiver work, then room exchange, then estate clean-out. Each listing seemed to require a phone plan, a permanent address, a background check fee, a brightness she no longer knew how to imitate. When her allotted computer time ended, she wandered toward the local bulletin board near the front desk. There were notices for piano lessons, firewood, a lost blue healer, church choir practice, estate sale volunteers, and a county auction list printed on yellow paper. One line stopped her: condemned fermentation cellar, former German provision house, unclaimed parcel, sealed bid minimum $8, buyer responsible for removal, remediation or demolition. Below it was an address she did not know and a handwritten note. Inquire County Clerk, Friday deadline. Maren read the line again. Fermentation Cellar. The word opened a door in her body before her mind had time to refuse it. She saw Nora's hands pressing cabbage beneath brine. She saw stone walls cooled by earth. She smelled dill, vinegar, and damp limestone. For a moment the library around her became very distant, not gone, but held behind glass. She copied the address onto the back of a discarded checkout slip. Her hand shook once, then steadied. At the reference desk, she asked the librarian where the county clerk's office was. The librarian, a woman with short white hair and a cardigan the colour of oatmeal, looked at Maren's coat, her hollowed face, the careful way she held herself together. 3 blocks over, the woman said, but they close at 4. It was 3:12. Maren thanked her and walked outside into the cold with the checkout slip folded in her palm. The decision was not grand. It did not arrive with music or certainty or any clean feeling that life was turning. It came as a movement of the body before language. She crossed the parking lot, opened the wagon, and sat behind the wheel. The belt complained when the engine turned over. The gas needle trembled near empty. She took the expired badge from the console and removed the $8 from behind it. The bills were warm from being kept close. For a minute, Maren held them against the steering wheel, looking at the old hospital photograph, the face of the woman who had believed she could survive by being useful. Then she tucked the badge into the glove box, placed the money in her coat pocket, and drove toward the courthouse square. By the time she reached the county building, the afternoon light had begun to thin over the limestone walls, and the wind carried the smell of cedar smoke from somewhere beyond Main Street. Inside her pocket, the $8 waited like a seed. The station wagon gave out 7 miles before Fredericksburg, with a cough so final that even the birds seemed to pause in the fence wire. Maren coasted onto the shoulder, gravel ticking beneath the tires, the engine shuddering once before it settled into a silence that had the clean, flat sound of decision. Steam did not pour from the hood. Nothing dramatic happened. The car simply stopped being willing. For a while she sat with both hands on the wheel, watching cedar and mesquite lean under the pale November sky. Traffic passed in careful bursts. A white pickup slowed, then continued. A cattle trailer rattled by, carrying the warm, sour smell of livestock. Farther off, a windmill moved over a dry tank, its blades turning with the tired patience of a thing that had seen many people come to the edge of themselves. She tried the key twice. The belt whined. The engine clicked. No more. Her phone had 17% battery and no service. In the back seat were 2 boxes, a duffel, a cracked saucer wrapped in a towel, and the envelope of papers she had not yet learned how to throw away. She took only what she could carry without staggering, the duffel across one shoulder, the coat on her body, the county notice folded in her pocket. She locked the wagon, though there was nothing inside worth stealing except the evidence of a life interrupted. The walk began on the shoulder of US 290, westbound toward town, with cedar scrub on one side and fenced pasture on the other. A cold wind moved down from the north, not hard, but steady enough to worry at her ears and make her eyes water. The afternoon temperature was 43 degrees when she passed a roadside bank sign blinking time and weather above a dry creek crossing. By dusk it would fall toward 36. She walked 2 miles before a church van stopped. The driver was an older man with a white beard trimmed close to his chin, wearing a denim jacket with a lamb's wool collar. He did not ask for a story. That was his kindness. He only leaned across the passenger seat and opened the door. Going into town. Yes, sir. Climb in. The van smelled faintly of coffee, hymnals, and dust caught in the heat of vents. A cardboard box of canned green beans slid on the floor when he pulled back onto the road. He said he was headed only as far as the east side, and Maren said that was more than enough. He nodded once, as if excess gratitude made him uncomfortable. They passed low stone houses, peach orchards stripped for winter, and a place selling rusted tractor wheels arranged like wreaths along the fence. The sun lowered behind the hills, turning the grass copper and then grey. When the man let her out beside a closed feed store on the edge of Fredericksburg, he pointed toward Main Street. County building is that way. If you miss it, keep walking until the courthouse tells you to stop. Thank you. He looked at her shoes, then at her face. Cold night coming. I know. He reached behind the seat and handed her a brown paper sack. Inside were 2 oranges and a biscuit wrapped in foil. He did not wait for her to refuse. The van pulled away, its red tail lights shrinking between live oaks. The county offices were already closed by the time she reached town. The sky had gone violet. Storefront windows glowed along Main Street, each one holding a warmer life than the sidewalk. She passed a bakery with pretzels stacked behind glass, a German restaurant where candlelight trembled on checkered cloth, a leather shop smelling richly of belts and saddles, a hardware store with rakes and stovepipe in the front window, and a narrow bookstore whose doorbell chimed each time someone entered. Fredericksburg looked made of limestone memory and careful commerce. Tourists moved in pairs beneath awnings. A woman carried a paper bag of pastries against her coat. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, and the sound went through Maren as if through a house with no furniture. She did not go into any of the restaurants. She did not have enough money to sit under warm lights and pretend she belonged to them. Instead, she walked to a public restroom near the visitor center, washed her hands in cold water, and ate the biscuit on a bench under a darkening pecan tree. The oranges she kept for morning. There were no shelter beds available that night. The woman at the police station said it gently after making 2 calls. She offered Maren a list of resources and a place to sit in the lobby until 10, but the chairs were hard plastic beneath fluorescent light, and the officer at the desk kept looking at the duffel as if it might become a problem. Maren thanked them and left before her presence had to be explained. A mile outside town, behind a hay barn set back from a farm road, she found shelter from the wind. The barn stood open on one side, filled with square bales stacked in rows that smelled of dust, dry grass and summer sealed into stems. She climbed behind the 3rd row, where no headlights could reach, and arranged herself in a narrow hollow between hay and wall. The temperature dropped to 34 before midnight. She knew because an old thermometer hung on a nail near the door, its glass tube silver in the moonlight. She wore her coat, wrapped her arms inside the sleeves, and tucked her hands beneath her ribs. The barn roof clicked as it cooled. Mice worked somewhere behind the boards with tiny, deliberate sounds. Outside, a dog barked once and then decided against continuing. Maren slept in fragments. Each time she woke, she had to remember where she was. Not the hospital, not the car, not her mother's carport. Hay barn, Gillespie County, waiting for morning. At first light, frost showed along the fence wire. She ate 1 orange slowly, section by section, letting the bitterness from the peel stay on her fingers because it reminded her of Nora's marmalade days. Then she walked back toward town, legs stiff, duffel cutting into her shoulder. The county clerk's office occupied the 1st floor of a limestone building off the courthouse square. Its hallway smelled of waxed floor, paper, and old heating ducts. Framed maps hung along the wall, some faded to the color of weak tea. At the end of the corridor, beneath a sign that read County Clerk, 2 glass doors stood open. Inside, the light was yellow and practical. Counters divided the room from rows of filing cabinets, plat books, rolling carts, and shelves loaded with deed volumes bound in cloth the color of dried blood. A copier warmed and clicked in the corner. A plastic bowl of peppermint candies sat beside a stack of forms. Behind the counter, a woman with short iron-grey hair looked up from a ledger. Her nameplate read Dorothy W. Heinemann, County Clerk. She wore a charcoal cardigan over a white blouse, half-moon glasses on a silver chain, and a wedding ring so thin it had nearly disappeared into the work-worn shape of her hand. There was nothing hurried about her. She had the face of a person who had spent decades telling people exactly what paperwork could and could not do for them. "Morning," she said. "Good morning, ma'am." Maren unfolded the auction notice and placed it on the counter. "I came about this parcel." Dorothy Heinemann did not reach for the paper right away. She looked first at Maren's coat, then her duffel, then the crease in the notice from being opened too many times. "The provision cellar." "Yes, ma'am." "You here on behalf of someone?" "No, ma'am." "You a contractor?" "No, ma'am." The clerk adjusted her glasses and picked up the paper. She read the notice, though she clearly knew its contents already. You understand this is not a house? Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no electric service? Yes, ma'am. No water connection? Yes, ma'am. No septic record that I would trust? Yes, ma'am. The county has had it marked unsafe for more years than you've been alive. Maren looked at the peppermint bowl, then back at the woman. Yes, ma'am. Dorothy tapped the paper once with one blunt fingernail. You understand that buyer responsible means buyer responsible, not the county, not the previous owner, not some preservation society after you get sentimental about stone walls. If that roof falls and takes your foot with it, the county will not send flowers. Yes, ma'am. The faintest movement touched Dorothy's mouth. Not quite amusement. And you understand sealed bid minimum does not mean a bargain. It means no one else wanted the liability. Yes, ma'am. Dorothy leaned back in her chair. The chair gave a small wooden complaint. You have identification. Maren took out the expired hospital badge by mistake, then froze with it in her hand. The photograph looked up at her from behind scratched plastic. The clerk waited without softening the moment too much. Maren put the badge away and found her driver's license. Dorothy examined it. Klein, she said. Maren's fingers tightened on the edge of the counter. Yes, ma'am. The clerk looked again more carefully this time. Any relation to Hannelore Klein out on Lower Crabapple? The room held still around that name. She was my grandmother. Dorothy removed her glasses. Without them, her eyes looked less official and more tired. Well, she said after a moment, that explains the way you said Fermentation Cellar. Maren did not answer. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, something unmeasured would come out. Dorothy stood and crossed to a filing cabinet, moving with the slow certainty of a woman whose body knew every drawer by memory. She pulled one open, lifted a folder, then another, and returned with a parcel file held together by a brass brad. I knew your grandmother some, she said, not close. Nobody was close with Nora unless Nora decided it. But she brought my mother pickled okra one summer when Daddy was laid up after his stroke, would not take money, said vegetables did not like being counted that way. Maren looked down. That sounds like her. It was good okra. Dorothy opened the file. Inside were plats, notices, tax records, a condemnation order, photographs clipped to inspection reports, and a deed prepared in advance with blank spaces for the purchaser's name. The building in the photographs looked lower than Maren expected, almost swallowed by brush, with a stone entry and a roofline sagging beneath cedar limbs. There were 3 sealed bids, Dorothy said. Maren's throat tightened. One was blank, one was from a scrap man who withdrew when he learned stone does not sell like tin. One was yours if you have the minimum. Maren took the bills from her coat pocket. They seemed almost indecently small on the counter. Dorothy looked at them and then at her. You have any more than this? No, ma'am. Not asking for the county, asking for you. Maren held her silence. The clerk sighed, not impatiently, but as if she had reached the place where official duty and human knowledge met, and neither could move the other aside. All right. She counted the bills, wrote a receipt by hand, and opened a drawer beneath the counter. From it she took a brass stamp mounted on a dark wooden handle. The stamp had weight. Maren could see that, by the way. Dorothy lifted it with both hands, setting it above the deed with an old ceremony. Sign here. Full legal name. Maren signed. The pen skipped once where the paper grain caught. Dorothy turned the deed, signed as witness, then pressed the brass stamp down. The sound was not loud, but it travelled through the counter and into Maren's bones. A seal appeared in the paper, raised and clean, making official what felt impossible. Dorothy filled out the receipt, tore it free, and slid it across with the deed packet. Directions, she said, pulling a yellow sticky note from a drawer. You go north on Milam until it runs out of town, take Lower Crabapple Road west, then watch for an unmarked limestone lane after the second low-water crossing. Not the first. The first will take you to the Pfeiffer place, and their dog has opinions. Your lane has 2 walnut trees at the mouth, Vone half dead. Walk in from there. Do not drive, the washout will take an axle. I do not have the car anymore. Dorothy looked at her again, and something in the room changed by the width of a breath. There is a bench outside, she said. You can sit a while before you start. Thank you. Dorothy clipped the documents into a manila envelope and wrote Maren's name across the front. Then, after a pause, she opened the top desk drawer and placed the dollar bill from the deed payment inside a narrow compartment rather than in the cash tray. Maren noticed but did not ask. The clerk saw her notice. For luck, Dorothy said. Maren folded the envelope against her chest. I don't know if I believe in that. Neither do I, Dorothy said, but I keep records for a living. Sometimes a thing kept becomes a kind of witness. Outside, the courthouse clock was striking 10. Maren sat on the bench because Dorothy had given her permission to be still, and because her knees had begun to tremble now that the deed was real. The square moved around her in an ordinary way. A delivery truck backed toward the bakery. 2 women compared wreaths outside a shop window. A man in a cowboy hat crossed the street carrying coffee in each hand. The town did not know that something had shifted beneath its own mourning. She ate the second orange. The peel came away in ragged strips, spraying oil against her thumb. She put the peel in the trash and kept the seeds in her pocket without thinking. By late morning, she began the walk. Lower Crabapple Road left town gradually past a tire shop, a stone church with a bell tower, and a row of modest houses where laundry moved on lines despite the cold. Beyond the last subdivision, the road narrowed and the land opened into hill country pasture. Dry grass shone silver in the ditches. Limestone showed white where the earth had been cut. Live oaks held their leaves in dark, dense clumps while the walnut trees stood bare and penciled against the sky. A brown dog came out from under a cattle guard at the first low water crossing, not barking, only watching. Maren stopped. The dog was large and ribbed with one torn ear and a yellow rope collar. It considered her with the seriousness of rural animals, then turned away as if she had failed to be interesting enough. "That your opinion?" she asked softly. The dog did not answer. She went on. The second crossing held a shallow run of water clear enough to show every stone beneath it. She stepped across on flat rocks, the duffel pulling her balance to one side. Past the crossing, she began watching for the walnut trees Dorothy had described. They appeared after half a mile, standing on either side of a lane so grown with grass that it looked less like an entrance than an old decision the land had nearly taken back. One tree was healthy and wide-limbed, its bark ridged like folded hands. The other was split by lightning, half alive, half silvered deadwood. Between them a limestone post leaned in the weeds. No mailbox, no number, no sign. Maren turned into the lane. The property revealed itself slowly, as neglected places do, not offering a face until a person has come far enough to be accountable for seeing it. The lane dipped between cedar and prickly pear, then rose toward a clearing where stonework showed through sumac and dead grass. At first, Maren saw only the entry. It was built into the side of a low hill, a rectangular stone front about 16 feet wide, made of hand-cut limestone blocks darkened by weather and streaked with mineral stains. The wooden door hung beneath a shallow shed roof patched long ago with corrugated tin. The tin had rusted through in 3 places and bent down at the left corner, where rain had found its way year after year. Above the door, a short chimney of pale stone rose from the roofline, capped with a rusted spark screen tilted like an old hat. Then she saw that the cellar was attached to a compact provision house, half above ground, half embraced by the hill. It measured perhaps 24 feet by 18, with thick stone walls, 2 narrow front windows and a rear section dug into earth for cool storage. The roof was cedar shake beneath scraps of tin, sagging along the north edge. The mortar between some stones had powdered away. A grapevine, leafless now, climbed the east wall and vanished beneath the eaves. A weathered wooden sign lay face down near the steps, half buried in leaves. Maren set down the duffel and turned it over. Klein Daughter Provisions. The letters had been hand-carved once, then painted dark green. Time had taken most of the paint, but the words remained in the grooves, patient and exact. Maren crouched beside it longer than she meant to. Her grandmother's name was not on the sign. Not directly, but Klein was there, cut deep enough to outlast paint, weather, neglect, and whatever human forgetting had passed over the place. She carried the sign to the wall and leaned it beneath the window. The door was held shut by a rusted hasp and a county padlock. Dorothy had given her a key with the deed packet, tied to a piece of red string. It took both hands to turn it. The lock opened with a dry internal snap that sounded louder than any welcome. Maren lifted the hasp. The door dragged across the threshold, scraping grit and leaves. Cold air breathed out from inside, carrying a smell so sudden and familiar she closed her eyes. Vinegar, stone, dry herbs, old wood, earth, held at a steady 55 degrees. Not rot, not abandonment alone. Something kept. The front room was dim, but daylight entered through the two narrow windows in dusty bars. Maren stood at the threshold until her eyes adjusted. To the left was a counter made from wide boards worn hollow at the centre. Behind it, shelves lined the wall, some collapsed, some still holding brown bottles and empty jars filmed grey. A ledger desk sat beneath the window, with one leg propped on a brick. Mouse droppings dotted the floor near a split sack of something long since eaten away. The floorboards in the front room were white pine, cupped and darkened but still present. A small iron stove sat in the corner, its pipe rising into the chimney Dorothy had warned her not to trust. Beside it were kindling scraps, brittle with age. Someone had swept here once with care. Not recently, but the shape of order remained beneath the dust. Maren stepped inside. The room answered with a creak. She waited, then shifted her weight and listened again. The building did not groan, it did not object. Dust moved in the light, slow as breath. Beyond the front room, a low doorway opened into the back chamber. The temperature changed when she passed through it, settling around her skin with the cold, damp closeness of earth. This was the true cellar, built into the hill with fieldstone walls and a ceiling crossed by heavy cedar beams. The floor was packed clay near the doorway and stone farther in. Wooden racks lined both sides, and on them stood crocks. Dozens of them. Some were small as soup pots. Others were 5-gallon vessels with handles shaped by hand and salt glaze running down their sides in brown waves. A few had blue numbers stamped into the clay. Cloth covers had rotted away from most, leaving only string, wax, or fallen lids. The air held the ghost of dill, wine vinegar, dried sage, and something apple-like faint but not gone. Maren did not touch anything. At the far end of the chamber stood the largest crock, broad and heavy, with a lid set crookedly atop it. 10 gallons, maybe more. It sat on the lowest shelf where the stone wall curved inward, and the light did not reach clearly. Dry leaves had blown into that corner and gathered around its base. She looked at it for a long moment, but fatigue moved through her before curiosity could take shape. There would be time. First, she had to find where the roof leaked, whether the floor would hold, and which corner was safest for sleeping. She returned to the front room and studied it as she would once have studied a hospital room at the beginning of shift. Hazards first, broken glass beneath the east window, a soft board near the counter, animal nesting in the upper shelf. No fresh droppings near the stove, which meant any current residents had better quarters elsewhere. She dragged her duffel to the wall opposite the stove. From it she took her grey blanket, the cracked saucer wrapped in a towel, and the envelope of documents. She placed the saucer on the ledger desk, not because it belonged there, but because it needed to be somewhere other than a box. The light faded early. Without electricity, evening entered room by room until objects lost their edges. Maren found a stub of candle in the desk drawer, bent but usable, and lit it with matches from her coat pocket. The flame was thin at first, then steadied. It cast the counter, the shelves, the stove, and the old jars into a trembling gold that made the place seem less ruined than withheld. She ate the last of the crackers from her bag and drank water from the bottle she had filled at the library. Outside, wind moved through the walnut branches with a dry clatter. Something small scratched once beneath the wall, then went quiet. Far off, a truck passed on the road, its sound rising and falling until the land took it back. Maren lay on the floor with her coat beneath her head, the blanket pulled to her chin. The pine boards were hard. Cold came up through them, but not as sharply as it had through the car floor. the building held around her, damaged and unspeaking. For the first time in weeks, no one could ask her to leave. She listened to the house settle. A drip sounded from the back room at long intervals. The wind pressed at the door and failed to open it. The candle burned lower. Shadows from the shelves lengthened across the ceiling, like hands reaching without demand. In the dark, Maren did not make plans. Plans belonged to people with bank accounts, appointments, and roofs they trusted. She only lay still and counted her breaths until the counting was no longer needed. The house was not empty, it had been waiting. At first light, Maren learned the floor by failing to trust it. She rose before the sun had climbed over the ridge, stiff from the boards and from the kind of sleep that never descended fully. The candle had died sometime in the night, leaving a curl of black wick inside a shallow cup of wax. Pale light entered through the front windows, making the dust on the counter look almost blue. She put one foot down and waited. The pine answered under her heel, not with collapse but with a long, tired complaint. The board nearest the counter gave too much at one end. She marked it by setting an empty jar over the place. Near the doorway, 3 boards held. By the stove, the floor dipped toward the wall, but not dangerously. She walked the room slowly, testing each plank with the careful pressure she had once used when helping patients stand after surgery. Wait first, pause, then trust, or do not. Outside, frost lay thin across the dead grass and along the fallen sign. The 2 walnut trees at the lane mouth held still under the morning. A crow moved between branches, black against the whitening sky. Maren stood in the doorway with her coat wrapped around her, listening to the quiet beyond the building. There was no city hum, no elevator bell, no distant monitor alarm passing through walls, only wind in cedar. The first 3 days became a practice of finding what could still be used. Behind the provision house, half hidden in broomweed, she found the well. Its stone curb had cracked on the south side, and the wooden cover had gone soft along one edge. But when she lifted it carefully, cold darkness opened below. She dropped a pebble and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then a small, clean sound of water. The rope had rotted through, and there was no bucket. She replaced the cover and laid 2 flat stones across it so no animal or person half asleep would step wrong. Farther down the slope, near a cluster of sumac, she found the outhouse. Its door hung from one hinge, and a wasp nest, abandoned for winter, filled the upper corner like grey paper folded by a tiny hand. The seatboard was split, but the pit had been properly dug and limed long ago. She cleaned it with a broken broom from the front room, knocked out the nest with a stick, and fixed the door with baling wire she found wrapped around a fence post. It was not comfort. It was a beginning. She learned where the roof leaked by setting jars under the drips when rain came on the second afternoon, 1 above the ledger desk, 2 near the back doorway, 1 in the cellar itself, where water slid down the north wall through a seam in the stone and gathered in a shallow depression. The sound of drops hitting glass kept time through the evening, irregular but honest. She learned the creaks of the floor and gave them names without meaning to. The long complaint near the counter, the sharp pop beside the stove, the hollow board by the front door. She did not step on the soft plank after dusk. She did not lean against the east shelf. She kept the deed packet wrapped in her sweater and set it on the highest dry shelf she trusted. Food became arithmetic. 1 orange gone, crackers gone, no money left except the deed in her name and the receipt folded inside it. On the second day, she walked back toward town with the empty water bottle and the county envelope in her coat. Her legs felt brittle, but movement was warmer than sitting. The hardware store on Main Street was called Vogel and Sons, though the Sons appeared to be long absent or long retired. Its front windows held stovepipe hand tools, seed packets faded by sun, a red snow shovel no one in Texas would need often, and a pyramid of canning jars arranged around a sign that said lids in stock limit 2 boxes. Inside, the store smelled of linseed oil, rope, mouse poison, potting soil, and metal. Wooden floors ran narrow and dark underfoot. Nails were sold from open bins. A wall of drawers held hinges, washers, screws, cotter pins, sash cord, faucet seats, and other modest objects whose names people once knew because repair had been common language. Behind the counter stood a man with a silver mustache, broad shoulders, and spectacles balanced low on his nose. He wore a canvas apron rubbed shiny across the stomach and a flannel shirt with cuffs frayed white at the edges. His hair was cut short, but not recently. His hands were large, square, and scarred across the knuckles. He looked up from sharpening a pencil with a pocket knife. "You lost?" Maren held the county envelope with both hands. "I bought the condemned provision cellar off Lower Crabapple." The pencil stopped. "That's so." "Yes, sir." "You the demolition crew?" "No, sir." He watched her a moment longer, then set the pencil down. "Name?" "Maren Klein." The store seemed to grow quieter around the name. A radio played somewhere in back, low enough that the music became only rhythm. The man took off his spectacles and wiped them on his apron. "August Vogel," he said. "My father knew the Kleins. My grandfather knew them better. What are you needing?" Maren had made a list on the back of a library receipt, but now the words looked childish and insufficient. Rope, bucket, matches, food if possible, brush, nails, candle. She placed it on the counter. August read it without expression. "You got money?" "No, sir." "Credit?" "No, sir." "Job?" "No, sir." He folded the receipt once, then unfolded it and read again, as if a better answer might be written between the lines. "You got sense enough not to light that stove before the chimney is cleaned." "Yes, sir." "That is something." He came around the counter and walked toward the back aisle, not asking her to follow, but not forbidding it. Maren followed. From a shelf he took a galvanized bucket with a dent in its side, from another a coil of cotton rope, not new but sound. He selected 2 boxes of matches, a wire brush, a stiff broom head, 3 candles, a packet of 6-penny nails, a small tin of stove black, and a used putty knife with a wooden handle darkened by use. At the counter he opened a drawer and removed a thin booklet with a cracked green cover. "Home Repairs for Farm Buildings, 1948 edition." "This came out of a box nobody claimed," he said. "Chimneys start at page 32, roof leaks at 57, floors at 74. Some of the wiring advice will kill you, so do not read that section as gospel. I cannot pay for these. I heard you. I do not want to take what I can't pay back." August looked at her over the spectacles. "Then pay it back." "When?" "When you can." He pulled a ledger from beneath the counter. Its pages ruled in blue and red. At the top of a fresh line he wrote her name. His handwriting was blunt and upright. "Store credit. I don't have references. You have a building everybody else left to fall down, and you walked here before breakfast. That will do for now." Maren swallowed once. "I can work." "Can you sweep?" "Yes, sir." "Can you lift 50 pounds?" "Not today." He nodded, accepting the truth as more useful than pride. "Then sweep when you can. Bring back the bucket if the well is dead. Do not drink from it until somebody tests it. There's a public spigot behind the church fellowship hall, north side. Handle sticks, push down hard." He wrote prices beside each item, not to demand payment, but to give the debt a shape. Galvanized bucket used $2.75. Cotton rope 30 feet $3.60. Wire chimney brush, loan, no charge if returned. Stiff broom head $1.15. Candles 3, $45. Strike anywhere matches 2 boxes 0.30 up. 6-penny common nails £1 0.82. Stove black partial tin 0.40. Putty knife used $0.25. Manual no charge. Total $9.72, not counting the brush. Maren stared at the number. It was more money than she had in the world, and less than what the hospital cafeteria had charged for a sandwich and coffee during night shift. "I'll write it down too," she said. August slid the ledger toward her. "It is already written." He packed the items into a flour sack and tied the rope around it. At the door, as she lifted the awkward bundle, he called after her. "Page 32 before matches." "Yes, sir." "And girl." She turned. Creosote catches like sin take longer than you think. The walk back took most of the afternoon. Maren stopped 3 times to shift the bundle from one shoulder to the other. At the church fellowship hall, she found the spigot on the north side as promised and filled the bottle. The handle did stick. She had to press it down with both hands until water came in a sudden cold rush, splashing over her fingers and darkening the sleeve of her coat. By the time she reached the lane, her arms trembled. The brown dog watched from across the road and did not come closer. She took that as permission. For 2 days she read the chimney chapter before touching the stove. The manual described a methodical order: inspect the firebox, check the flue path, cover the stove opening, work from the top, if possible from below if not, remove creosote in stages, never assume a chimney is sound because smoke once rose through it. A blocked chimney did not forgive optimism. The roof above the chimney was not safe enough to climb. The ladder she found behind the building had a split rail and 2 missing rungs, so she worked from below. She laid a torn feed sack over the stove opening and tied it with cord, leaving a gap just wide enough for the brush handle. She wrapped a rag around her nose and mouth. Then she loosened the pipe from the stove collar, slow and careful, because rusted metal had moods. Soot fell immediately, soft as black flour, coating the floor around her boots. The pipe came free with a groan. Inside, the creosote was thick, blistered and glossy in places, like tar that had learned patience. August had been right. It would catch like sin. Maren worked in intervals, brush upward, twist, pull down, knock loose, sweep, wait for dust to settle, again. The first hour produced flakes as large as coins. The second produced powder so fine it found the crease of her eyelids. By noon, her arms ached from lifting the brush overhead. By mid-afternoon, her shoulders burned. She stopped only to drink water and step outside into cold air until her coughing eased. The chimney had 2 bends where soot had gathered in stubborn shelves. She used the putty knife taped to the broom handle to scrape what the brush could not reach, listening for the change in sound when metal met stone instead of build-up. Creosote came down in curls, chips, flakes, and one hard black lump that struck the stove plate with a sound like a dropped bone. She worked 6 hours the first day and 4 the next. When the flue finally began to draft cold air downward, she felt it against her face, a faint movement from above. She held the candle near the opening without placing it inside. The flame bent toward the chimney. Not enough to trust fully. Enough to try small. She gathered dry twigs from beneath the cedar trees and split brittle kindling from a collapsed shelf in the back room, avoiding any board with paint or rot. In the stove she laid a twist of paper from an outdated county notice, 3 pencil-thin sticks and 1 thumb-sized piece of dry cedar. She opened the draft, her hands hovered with the match. For a moment she heard the hospital again, not loudly, only the ghost of alarms layered under the wind. Then she struck the match. The flame took to paper first, then licked the cedar. Smoke hesitated at the stove door, testing the room, and Maren's body tightened, but then it drew backward up through the pipe, thin and grey and obedient. The chimney accepted it. She fed the fire slowly for an hour. No roar, no haste, little sticks then larger. She stood beside the stove with one palm near the iron, feeling heat return to a room that had been cold for years. The scent was at first bitter with old soot, then warmer, touched by cedar and dust and iron waking. That evening she made her first hot meal in the building. August had added, without listing it, a paper packet of rice, 2 bouillon cubes, and a small onion gone soft at the top. She found them at the bottom of the flour sack when she unpacked it, wrapped in yesterday's newspaper. She boiled water in a dented pot discovered beneath the counter after scouring it with sand, ash, and more determination than confidence. The rice cooked unevenly, some grains soft, some still with a tooth to them. She sliced the onion with the putty knife after washing it 3 times. The bouillon turned the water golden and salty. She ate sitting on the floor near the stove, holding the cracked saucer under the pot lid because there was nowhere else to put it. Steam warmed her face. Outside, the wind moved over the roof and did not come in. It was the first meal in weeks that felt like it belonged to the same person who ate it. The next morning, She began inventory of the workroom. She did not search. Searching had a hunger in it. She inventoried because Nora had taught that you honored a pantry by knowing what was there. On the left wall, top shelf, 12-quart jars, 3 cracked, 9 whole, all cloudy with dust, 2 brown bottles with corks hardened into place, 1 blue glass bottle empty with a label worn to pulp, a bundle of linen covers stiff with age and mouse damage. Second shelf, 4 2-gallon Crocks, 1 with a hairline fracture from rim to base, 1 wooden tamper broken handle, a stone weight with a chip, 3 smaller weights sound, a coil of twine, a paper packet of mustard seed gone dry and scentless. Lower shelf, 2 5-gallon Crocks empty, 1 crock holding only dust and a dead beetle, 1 wooden crate marked apples in black stencil. Beneath the crate, a hand scale with iron weights from 1 ounce to 2 pounds, rusted but present. On the right wall, vinegar bottles. More than 20, some green, some brown, some clear, a funnel made of tin, a long-handled spoon, a cracked enamel basin, 2 stoneware jugs with narrow necks, a bundle of dried stems hanging from a peg, too old to identify by sight, though when she touched one gently and brought her fingers near her face, she caught the faintest trace of time. She wrote each item in the back pages of the repair manual, leaving room for condition notes. Whole, cracked, usable after cleaning, sentimental only unknown. In the back corner stood the largest crock. It had not been made for a casual household. 10 gallons, wide-bellied, salt-glazed, with 2 handles thick enough to grip with work gloves. A blue number 10 had been stamped near the rim. The lid did not match perfectly, but it fit well enough to keep dust from falling straight in. Unlike the other crocks, this one sat not on a shelf, but on 2 low cedar blocks that lifted it 3 inches above the floor. Maren knelt before it. Dry leaves had gathered around the base, but not beneath it. That was the first odd thing. The floor under the crock was cleaner than the floor around it, as if someone had swept before placing it there, and nothing had disturbed it since. She touched the side with her knuckles. A crock that size should have rung deep and open if empty. This one answered dull. She tapped again. Higher, different sound. Lower, dull again. The lid was heavy but not sealed. She lifted it with both hands and set it on the floor. Inside was sand. Not dirt blown in over time. Sand, dry, pale and level, packed nearly to the shoulder of the vessel. Someone had smoothed the surface long ago. In the center lay a round cedar disc, fitted just inside the crock's mouth beneath the sand line, its edge barely visible where sand had shrunk away. Maren sat back on her heels. For several breaths she did nothing. The room around her seemed to withdraw, leaving only the crock, the cedar disc, and the faint apple vinegar smell held in the stone walls. She pressed 2 fingers into the sand near the edge. It was clean and dry, finer than creek sand, with no root, no leaf mold, no insect husk. She scooped a handful into an empty jar, then another. The sand slid with a whispering sound that made the cellar feel almost occupied. After removing an inch, she found the cedar disc more clearly. It had been cut round and planed smooth, with 2 finger holes near the center. The wood had darkened but not rotted, protected by dryness and clay. Around its edge, wax had once been pressed as a seal. Most of it had cracked away. Maren lifted through the finger holes. The disc resisted, then came free with a faint sigh, as if air had been waiting beneath it for a long time. Under the disc the crock continued downward, but now the sand changed. It filled the sides while the center held packages wrapped in oilcloth. 3 large bundles, 1 narrow bundle, 1 tin box, all packed tightly in dry sand and cushioned with cedar shavings that still held a ghost of their scent. She did not pull them out quickly, her hands would not allow it. First, she cleared sand from the edges with the spoon, then she lifted the narrow bundle and set it on the work table. It was tied with linen tape, browned by age, knotted in a square knot that had hardened but not failed. She worked it loose with the putty knife, careful not to cut the cloth beneath. Inside were tools, a cabbage knife with a curved blade, darkened by time but still keen beneath the tarnish, a wooden kraut cutter board with 2 blades set into a frame, worn smooth where hands had held it, a small ceramic weight stamped with a maker's mark from New Braunfels, a glass hydrometer in a paper sleeve, its scale printed in tiny numbers, a thermometer, mercury intact, protected inside a wooden case. Maren laid each item on the table. Her breathing had gone shallow. The first large bundle held raw material and supplies, not valuable to anyone careless, priceless to someone who understood use. Packets of sea salt wrapped in waxed paper, mustard seed sealed in a small brown jar, dill seed, coriander, juniper berries, grape leaves pressed flat between paper, a linen bag of what appeared to be starter grains dried to pale crumbs, though she could not be sure. The second bundle held cloth and paper. Linen covers cut in circles, narrow labels, a pencil wrapped in thread, a stack of recipe cards tied in groups, not the main book, but working copies, their handwriting dense and slanted. On the first card, in German and English both, was a cucumber brine ratio. She did not read beyond that, not yet. The third bundle was heavier. Inside lay a leather book wrapped in oiled muslin. The leather had dried but not cracked through, and the strap around it was still sound. Maren placed it on the table and kept her hand on top of it, feeling the shape of pages beneath her palm. She knew what it was before she opened it. A recipe book. Not clean printed recipes from magazines, a working ledger. The kind of book kept by women whose knowledge had weight because it had fed people through drought, war, childbirth, fever, lean years and long winters without enough doctors nearby. She loosened the strap. On the first page, written in brown ink, was a title: Klein Family Ferments and Preserves, Fredericksburg and Gillespie County, 1860 to 1940. Below it, in smaller script, for the one who will listen long enough. Maren closed the cover. Her hands were shaking now, not violently, but with a fine tremor that made the table edge blur. The tin box remained in the crock. It was rectangular, about the size of a brick, wrapped separately in waxed cloth and sealed with twine. When she lifted it free, the weight surprised her. Not the weight of paper, not tools, something denser. She set it on the table beside the leather book and waited until her hands steadied enough to untie the cloth. The tin had once been painted dark blue, though most of the paint had flaked away. There was no lock, only a clasp stiff with age. She opened it with the putty knife. Money lay inside, not loose at first. Bundled, folded, rolled, old bills tied with cotton thread, coins wrapped in paper tubes browned at the ends, a small cloth pouch, beneath them an envelope thick enough to be a letter. Maren stepped back as if the box had given off heat. The room held no sound but the drip from the north wall and the blood moving in her ears. She did not count immediately. Counting would make it real, and real things required decisions. Instead, she closed the tin, opened it again, and looked once more, as if the contents might have changed into buttons, receipts, dried beans, anything less impossible. They did not change. She carried the tin to the front room where daylight was better. She washed her hands with water from the bottle, dried them on her coat lining, and cleared the ledger desk. Then she began. The bills were mostly old but not ancient, 10s and 20s from different years, some silver certificates, some Federal Reserve notes, folded flat and tied in stacks. The paper felt softer than modern money, almost cloth-like. Several bills bore dates from the 1930s. Others were later added across time by someone who had kept returning to the box. The coin rolls took longer, wheat pennies, their backs worn but readable, buffalo nickels with dates nearly gone, mercury dimes delicate and pale, standing Liberty quarters, Washington quarters from the war years, silver $half, a few Morgan dollars wrapped separately in cloth, heavy in the palm, one peace dollar from 1923, polished by handling. Inside the small pouch was a military medal on a faded ribbon, wrapped with a note that read only, "Do not sell this." The medal was dated 1918 on the back, with a name engraved so finely she had to carry it to the window to read it. Friedrich Elias Klein. Beneath the pouch lay 2 more rolls of bills, and under those the envelope. She did not open the envelope. Not yet. The counting took hours because she counted twice. Then a third time when disbelief made the first 2 seem unreliable. She made columns in the repair manual, separating bills, coins by type, and items not to be valued. Her nursing had returned to her, exact despite hunger and cold. Numbers lined themselves obediently beneath her pencil. When she finished, the total was $36,900.74. She wrote it once. $36,900.74. Then she put the pencil down and pressed both hands flat on the desk. Outside, afternoon had tilted toward evening. Light entered low through the windows, striking dust, glass, and the edge of the leather book. The money lay in ordered stacks across a desk that had perhaps once held invoices for vinegar, sauerkraut, pickled peaches, apple wine, dill beans and crocks, carried out by neighbors who knew the hands that made them. Maren did not smile, she did not laugh, she did not make a sound fit for anyone watching from beyond the walls. She gathered the bills and coins back into the tin with the care due to medicine. The medal she wrapped separately and placed on top. The envelope she held for a long time, her thumb moving once along the sealed edge. It had her grandmother's world in it, or something older than her grandmother, or something meant for a person who had not yet proven worthy of knowing. She could have opened it then, there was still enough light. Instead, she placed the envelope beside the leather book and covered both with a linen cloth from the bundle. She carried the tin box back to the workroom, then changed her mind and brought it forward again. The front room felt less damp. The stove was near. She set the tin beneath the ledger desk, then pushed the chair in front of it. That night, she did not light a fire. She could have. The chimney had drawn well enough. There was cedar kindling. There was rice left from the packet August had given her. There was now money enough to buy food, tools, repairs, perhaps even a night in a motel with white sheets and a shower that ran hot without asking anything of her. But the building was too full. Maren took the candle and went outside. The cold had settled low in the grass. Above the trees, the sky opened clean and dark, with stars emerging one by one over the hill country. She walked past the well, past the outhouse, down toward the shallow run of water beyond the second crossing. The creek moved over limestone in a thin silver sheet, making a sound so patient it seemed less like water travelling than water remembering how. She sat on a flat stone and watched it. Her hands smelled of sand, old paper, metal and cedar. Her nails were rimmed black from the chimney despite washing. A line of soot still marked one wrist. She rubbed it with her thumb and found that it did not come away. The money had not made the night easier to understand. It had only made the silence larger. For 6 weeks she had been reducing herself to what could be carried: a duffel, a cracked saucer, an expired badge, a few papers, a body tired enough to sleep in hay. Now inside a building no one wanted, under the dust of a forgotten trade, there was evidence that someone before her had also known how to keep things hidden until the right hands came. She stayed by the water until the cold entered her knees. When she returned to the provision house, the front room smelled faintly of stone and candle smoke. The leather book and sealed envelope waited beneath the linen cloth. The tin box sat under the desk. The crocks in the back chamber held their dark places. Maren lay down beside the cold stove, not sleeping, not reading, not yet deciding what kind of person discovery required her to become. The house was not empty. It had been waiting. Morning came in without warmth, only light. It entered the front room through the narrow windows and laid 2 pale rectangles across the floor, touching the edge of the ledger desk, the soot-dark stove, the chair pushed carefully into place. Maren woke before the birds, not because she had slept well, but because the sealed envelope had become a presence in the room stronger than cold. For a while she lay still beneath the blanket, watching her breath show faintly in the air. The tin box remained under the desk. The leather book rested beneath the linen cloth. The envelope lay on top of it, cream-coloured once, now browned along the edges and softened where many years of air had touched it without entering. She rose and built the smallest possible fire, not for comfort, but to steady her hands. 3 cedar splinters, a curl of paper, 1 match. The chimney took the smoke with a faint pull, and the stove began its slow work. She washed her face with cold water from the bottle, wiped the desk with a damp rag, and set the envelope in the centre of the cleared wood. The handwriting stopped her. Not because she knew it, she did not. The script was older than Nora's, more upright, with a German stiffness in the capitals and long careful descenders beneath the U and G, but certain habits had travelled forward, the exactness of the loops. The way the word Klein leaned slightly right, as if stepping into weather, the pressure of the pen where a sentence mattered. Maren touched the sealed flap. The gum had long ago dried, and the envelope opened with almost no resistance. Inside were 4 folded pages and a smaller scrap tucked between them. The paper had been folded along the same creases so many times before sealing that it seemed to remember how to open. She laid the pages flat, smoothing each one with both hands. At the top, in dark brown ink, the letter began. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this letter, then either the house has outlived my fear, or my fear has been more patient than I deserved. I write because Dr. Wilhelm Rausch in San Antonio told me on the 9th day of March 1941 that the sickness in my blood will not be bargained with. He said it plainly, and I was grateful for plainness. A person can work with a true measure even when the measure is hard. I do not know whether you are kin by blood, by mercy, by accident, or by the strange appointment of need. I only know that you have opened what was hidden in the Crock room, and so you must be someone with hands willing to lift more than dust. My name is Elisabetta Margarethe Klein. I was born near Fredericksburg in 1883, in the same valley where this provision house stands. My father was Johann Elias Klein, born in 1854 in Gillespie County, son of Friedrich Elias Klein, who came as a small boy from near Nassau with his mother, Anna Katharina Weber Klein, in 1847. Friedrich's father, Matthias Klein, had died on the passage before Galveston, and Anna arrived with 2 children, 1 trunk, 3 pewter spoons, a linen sack of rye seed, and a cabbage knife wrapped in wool. Anna married again here, but she kept the Klein name on the trade because Matthias had carved it into the handle of that knife before leaving the old country. She said a name is not property, it is a lamp. You do not own it so much as keep it burning for the next dark room. My grandmother Anna began with sauerkraut in a pit cellar behind a log house, using salt brought by wagon and cabbage grown in soil so thin it seemed to ask pardon for every harvest. My father built this stone provision house in 1879 after the peach crop failed, and the women of 5 families still needed a place cool enough to keep vinegar mothers alive through summer. He married my mother, Caroline Vogel, in 1881, and she brought with her the apple wine recipes from her people near New Braunfels. From those 2 lines came what you see in the book: cabbage, cucumbers, beets, beans, peaches, pears, Mustang grape vinegar, apple scrap vinegar, green tomato brine, sorghum beer, melon rind, pepper mash, and the herb salts used when meat was scarce, and vegetables had to carry flavour through a whole winter. If you are young, you may think recipes are instructions. They are not only that. They are records of weather, grief, hunger, birth, debt, sickness, church suppers, wagon roads washed out, soldiers not coming home, babies kept alive on broth, widows paid in jars, and neighbours learning each other's languages over a crock of cabbage. The trade began closing on July 17th, 1918. I write the date because dates keep us honest. That summer, word came that my brother Friedrich Elias Klein had died in France with the American Expeditionary Forces. The notice did not arrive first. His medal did, by mistake, in a box, sent through a church contact before the formal letter found us. My mother held the ribbon and would not sit down. My husband, Otto Richter Klein, had already been taken by influenza that same year, in October, after nursing men at a rail camp outside San Antonio. Our son, Matthias Otto, lived only 6 weeks through the fever season. So the year took brother, husband and child and left me with shelves full of crocks in a county where everyone had their own dead to count. After the war, people wanted new things: tinned food from stores, white bread wrapped in paper, pickles made in factories with labels bright enough to promise cleanliness. The young women had school, town work, telephones and dresses that did not smell of brine. I did not blame them. Every generation reaches for a cleaner apron than the one before it, but fewer came to learn, and fewer still wanted the patience of food that cannot be hurried. By 1940 I had kept this room mostly alone for more than 30 years. I sold enough to pay tax. I taught a few daughters, but they married out or moved west. I kept the crocks washed and the vinegar mothers fed. I told myself that was enough. It was not enough, but it was something. Now I'm leaving what I can. The money is not treasure. Do not let anyone make it loud in your mind. It is work turned into paper and coin, set aside jar by jar, season by season, after flour, salt, medicine, lamp oil, taxes and burial costs. Use it with a slow hand. Repair what keeps out weather first. Eat plain. Buy tools before comfort. Pay people who help you, unless they refuse for reasons of their own dignity. Keep a written account, because memory softens where numbers do not. The book is the larger inheritance. It contains 80 preparations from our people and our neighbours between 1860 and 1940. Some are German, some are Czech, some are Mexican. Some came from black cooks working ranch kitchens who knew more about pepper vinegar than any printed authority. Some came from Comanche trade stories repeated badly and then corrected by practice. Do not pretend purity. Food does not survive by staying pure. It survives by being fed, changed, shared, and kept safe. For cabbage, weigh after trimming. Use 2 pounds sea salt to 100 pounds cabbage, or 2% by weight if your scale is better than mine. Work the salt in until the cut edges shine and brine gathers when pressed. Pack hard enough that no air pockets remain. Weight it below its own brine. Keep between 65 and 72 degrees if possible for the first week, cooler after the first souring begins. Skim only what blooms on top. Do not fear cloudiness if the smell is clean and sharp. Test with paper if you have it. Below pH 4.0 is safer for keeping, though my grandmother judged by tongue and lived to 81. For cucumbers, use fresh fruit picked that morning, never yellowed, never soft at the blossom end. 3 tablespoons salt to 1 quart water will serve, but weigh when you can. Add grape leaves for tannin. Garlic after the second day, not before, if the heat is above 75. Keep them under brine with a stone scrubbed in boiling water and cooled 3 to 6 weeks depending on weather. The crock will teach you if you visit daily. For vinegar, do not strangle the mother. Cloth, not lid. Darkness, but air. Apple scraps. Sugar if the fruit is poor. Clean water and patience enough to let sweetness become sharpness without your meddling. If mold grows furred and coloured, throw away and begin again. If a pale veil forms and smells of fruit and acid, bless it by leaving it alone. You may be tempted to sell the old tools. Do not. A tool carries the shape of every hand that used it well. The cabbage knife, the kraut board, the ceramic weights, the hydrometer, the thermometer, all of them have served longer than most promises. Clean them, mend what needs mending. Use them only when you can do so without hurry. If you are not of our blood, then hear me carefully. Inheritance is not only blood. Blood forgets. Blood sells what should have been kept. Blood turns away from thresholds. The rightful inheritor is the one who receives with reverence and answers with labour. I have no daughter living. I have no son. I have a niece who may one day have children, and perhaps one of them will hear from an old woman named Hannah or Nora or some other softened name that food can remember hands. Perhaps not. Perhaps this letter will wait beyond all our guesses and find someone hungry enough to listen. In the yard, beneath the eastern walnut, you will find a horseshoe grown into the bark, placed there by my father when the roof beam was raised. It marks the side of the house that should be repaired first, because wind drives rain from that direction in spring storms. Remember this. Sentiment that does not become maintenance is only decoration. I am tired now, and the lamp is low. I have wrapped a candle made in 1881 from the last beeswax my mother rendered before her hands stiffened. Light it only when you need witness, not company. There is a difference. The house is not empty, it has been waiting. You are welcome here. Elisabetta Margarethe Klein. April 23, 1941. Maren read the letter once without moving. By the end, the fire had burned down to a red hollow in the stove, and the morning light had shifted from the desk to the floor. Her hands rested on either side of the pages, not touching them now. She had the strange sense that the room had leaned closer while she read, not to watch her, but to hear its own name spoken after years of not being called. She read it a second time, more slowly. This time, she stopped where the names gathered: Anna Katharina, Matthias, Friedrich, Caroline, Otto, Elisabetta Hannah. People who had lifted crocks, buried children, washed linen, paid taxes and kept vinegar mothers alive through heat that would have ruined them in a day. The letter did not make them grand. That was its honesty. They were not grand. They were exact. They had endured by work so ordinary it became nearly invisible. When Maren finished, she folded the pages along their original creases. Not new creases, not hurried ones. She returned each fold to the place it had been waiting to close. Then she set the letter beside the leather book and held her palm over both, hovering rather than pressing, as if blessing required restraint. She did not cry, but when she stood, she had to grip the desk until the room steadied. Outside, the day had grown clear and cold, the kind of blue Texas morning that can make bare branches look drawn by a patient hand. Maren carried the smaller scrap from the envelope, the one she had not read during the letter. On it, in the same handwriting, was a rough sketch of the provision house, 2 walnut trees, the well and the eastern side marked with a cross. She went through the back door because the letter had made the yard part of the message. The eastern walnut stood beyond the house, not at the lane mouth but near the slope where the hill folded around the cellar wall. It was wide and weathered, with roots pushing through limestone and grass. One limb had broken long ago, leaving a scar that had rolled over itself in thick lips of bark. Maren walked around the trunk once before she saw it. A horseshoe. Not hanging from a nail. Not resting in a fork. It had been placed against the young tree so many decades earlier that the walnut had grown around it, swallowing the iron at both ends. Only the curved middle remained visible, rusted dark, held in the living wood like a memory the tree had chosen not to reject. Maren touched it with 2 fingers. The metal was cold. On the house behind her, the eastern roof edge sagged most deeply. The letter had not been sentimental. It had been practical even in farewell. Repair this side first. Wind drives rain from there. Remember this. She looked up at the roof line, then down at her hands, then back at the horseshoe. The day seemed to arrange itself not into comfort, but into work. Inside again, she unwrapped the beeswax candle from the package Elsabeta had described. It was shorter than she expected, thick and hand-dipped. Its colour deepened from gold to brown over 60 years and more. The wick had been protected in folded paper. When she brought it near her face, it smelled faintly of honey, dust, and a summer no living person could return to. Light it only when you need witness, not company. Maren set it upright in a saucer from the shelf, not Nora's cracked one, that she left on the ledger desk. She waited until dusk because witness needed darkness around it. Through the afternoon she did small tasks, not because they mattered most, but because her body needed motions plain enough to hold. She swept the front room from back to door. She carried broken glass into a jar. She wiped the hand scale with a dry rag. She moved the tin box to the safest corner and wrapped it again. She did not open the money. She did not count it again. At sunset, the temperature dropped quickly. The sky beyond the windows turned lavender, then grey. Maren lit the stove with the same deliberate care, feeding it slowly until the iron held a low glow. Then she struck a match and touched it to the old candle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the wick caught. The flame was small and blue at the base, yellow above, steady after one uncertain breath. The smell of beeswax entered the room with almost painful gentleness. It did not smell like candles from stores. It smelled like comb, summer grass, dry wood, and hands that had worked near hives before Maren was born. She placed the candle on the ledger desk beside the folded letter, the leather book, the medal, and Nora's cracked saucer. The objects did not become holy. That would have been too easy. They became present. Maren sat on the floor with her back against the wall and let the flame do what speech could not. She began thinking of the chain that had brought her here, not as miracle, but as small hinges turning one after another. The librarian in the oatmeal cardigan, who had told her the clerk's office closed at 4, the church van driver with the 2 oranges and the biscuit wrapped in foil, Dorothy Heinemann, who had put $1 in her drawer for luck she did not claim to believe in, August Vogel writing a debt in his ledger as if debt could be dignified when it was witnessed honestly. There had been the bakery woman in Sagging too, adding a second-day-old roll without making mercy perform for itself. the police station woman who had made calls and lowered her voice when there were no beds, even the brown dog who had decided not to guard the road against her. No one had saved her. That was not the truth. They had placed small stones across water, one here, one there, enough for a crossing if she kept moving and did not demand that any single stone become a bridge. If you're watching this tonight from a warm room, or from a chair where you finally sat down after a long day, you may know the kind of kindness I mean, not the loud kind, not the kind that asks to be named, the sack of food left near a door, the ride offered without questions, the person at a counter who sees your hands shaking and slows their own voice. If you have ever been carried one more step by something small, write it in the comments. Someone else may read it on a hard evening and remember that the world has not gone entirely cold. Maren watched the beeswax candle burn lower. The flame made the window glass black and turned the room behind her into a reflection. In that reflection she saw a woman sitting on the floor of a condemned provision house, wearing a coat that had slept in barns, with soot at one wrist and a letter older than everyone who had failed her. But she also saw shelves, crocks, tools, a stove drawing clean, a roof that could be repaired from the eastern side first. Before sleeping, she wrapped the letter in linen and placed it inside the leather book. She set the medal on top of the book not as decoration, but as a guard, the cabbage knife, the hydrometer, the thermometer in its wooden case, and the ceramic weights she laid beside her blanket in a careful row. The tin box remained under the desk, hidden again, though not forgotten. She banked the fire as well as she knew how, and blew out the old candle only when the wick had burned deep enough to leave a small pool of wax around itself. The smoke rose in one thin line, then vanished into the dark. Maren lay down with the heirlooms beside her, close enough that if she reached out in the night, her fingers would find wood, glass, metal, and the kept evidence of hands that had not let go. Morning came in without warmth, only light. It entered the front room through the narrow windows and laid two pale rectangles across the floor, touching the edge of the ledger desk, the soot-dark stove, the chair pushed carefully into place. Maren woke before the birds, not because she had slept well, but because the sealed envelope had become a presence in the room stronger than cold. For a while she lay still beneath the blanket, watching her breath show faintly in the air. The tin box remained under the desk. The leather book rested beneath the linen cloth. The envelope lay on top of it, cream-coloured once, now browned along the edges and softened where many years of air had touched it without entering. She rose and built the smallest possible fire, not for comfort but to steady her hands. 3 cedar splinters, a curl of paper, 1 match. The chimney took the smoke with a faint pull, and the stove began its slow work. She washed her face with cold water from the bottle, wiped the desk with a damp rag, and set the envelope in the centre of the cleared wood. The handwriting stopped her. Not because she knew it, she did not. The script was older than Nora's, more upright, with a German stiffness in the capitals and long, careful descenders beneath the Y and G, but certain habits had travelled forward. The exactness of the loops, the way the word Klein leaned slightly right, as if stepping into weather, the pressure of the pen where a sentence mattered. Maren touched the sealed flap. The gum had long ago dried, and the envelope opened with almost no resistance. Inside were 4 folded pages and a smaller scrap tucked between them. The paper had been folded along the same creases so many times before sealing that it seemed to remember how to open. She laid the pages flat, smoothing each one with both hands. At the top, in dark brown ink, the letter began. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this letter, then either the house has outlived my fear, or my fear has been more patient than I deserved. I write because Dr. Wilhelm Rausch in San Antonio told me on the 9th day of March 1941 that the sickness in my blood will not be bargained with. He said it plainly, and I was grateful for plainness. A person can work with a true measure, even when the measure is hard. I do not know whether you are kin by blood, by mercy, by accident, or by the strange appointment of need. I only know that you have opened what was hidden in the crock room, and so you must be someone with hands willing to lift more than dust. My name is Elisabetta Margarethe Klein. I was born near Fredericksburg in 1883, in the same valley where this provision house stands. My father was Johann Elias Klein, born in 1854 in Gillespie County, son of Friedrich Elias Klein, who came as a small boy from near Nassau with his mother, Anna Katharina Weber Klein, in 1847. Friedrich's father, Matthias Klein, had died on the passage before Galveston, and Anna arrived with 2 children, 1 trunk, 3 pewter spoons, a linen sack of rye seed, and a cabbage knife wrapped in wool. Anna married again here, but she kept the Klein name on the trade because Matthias had carved it into the handle of that knife before leaving the old country. She said, "A name is not property, it is a lamp. You do not own it so much as keep it burning for the next dark room." My grandmother Anna began with sauerkraut in a pit cellar behind a log house, using salt brought by wagon and cabbage grown in soil so thin it seemed to ask pardon for every harvest. My father built this stone provision house in 1879 after the peach crop failed and the women of 5 families still needed a place cool enough to keep vinegar mothers alive through summer. He married my mother, Caroline Vogel, in 1881, and she brought with her the apple wine recipes from her people near New Braunfels. From those 2 lines came what you see in the book: cabbage, cucumbers, beets, beans, peaches, pears, Mustang grape vinegar, apple scrap vinegar, green tomato brine, sorghum beer, melon rind, pepper mash, and the herb salts used when meat was scarce and vegetables had to carry flavor through a whole winter. If you are young, you may think recipes are instructions. They are not only that. They are records of weather, grief, hunger, birth, debt, sickness, church suppers, wagon roads washed out, soldiers not coming home, babies kept alive on broth, widows paid in jars, and neighbors learning each other's languages over a crock of cabbage. The trade began closing on July 17, 1918. I write the date because dates keep us honest. That summer word came that my brother Friedrich Elias Klein had died in France with the American Expeditionary Forces. The notice did not arrive first. His medal did, by mistake, in a box sent through a church contact before the formal letter found us. My mother held the ribbon and would not sit down. My husband, Otto Richter Klein, had already been taken by influenza that same year, in October, after nursing men at a rail camp outside San Antonio. Our son, Matthias Otto, lived only 6 weeks through the fever season. So the year took brother, husband, and child, and left me with shelves full of crocks in a county where everyone had their own dead to count. After the war, people wanted new things: tinned food from stores, white bread wrapped in paper, pickles made in factories with labels bright enough to promise cleanliness. The young women had school, town work, telephones, and dresses that did not smell of brine. I did not blame them. Every generation reaches for a cleaner apron than the one before it, but fewer came to learn, and fewer still wanted the patience of food that cannot be hurried. By 1940, I had kept this room mostly alone for more than 30 years. I sold enough to pay tax. I taught a few daughters, but they married out or moved west. I kept the crocks washed and the vinegar mothers fed. I told myself that was enough. It was not enough, but it was something. Now I'm leaving what I can. The money is not treasure. Do not let anyone make it loud in your mind. It is work turned into paper and coin. Set aside jar by jar, season by season, after flour, salt, medicine, lamp oil, taxes, and burial costs. Use it with a slow hand. Repair what keeps out weather first. Eat plain. Buy tools before comfort. Pay people who help you, unless they refuse for reasons of their own dignity. Keep a written account, because memory softens where numbers do not. The book is the larger inheritance. It contains 80 preparations from our people and our neighbors between 1860 and 1940. Some are German, some are Czech, some are Mexican. Some came from black cooks working ranch kitchens who knew more about pepper vinegar than any printed authority. Some came from Comanche trade stories repeated badly and then corrected by practice. Do not pretend purity. Food does not survive by staying pure. It survives by being fed, changed, shared, and kept safe. For cabbage, weigh after trimming. Use 2 pounds sea salt to 100 pounds cabbage, or 2% by weight if your scale is better than mine. Work the salt in until the cut edges shine and brine gathers when pressed. Pack hard enough that no air pockets remain. Weight it below its own brine. Keep between 65 and 72 degrees if possible for the first week. Cooler after the first souring begins. Skim only what blooms on top. Do not fear cloudiness if the smell is clean and sharp. Test with paper if you have it. Below pH 4.0 is safer for keeping, though my grandmother judged by tongue and lived to 81. For cucumbers, use fresh fruit picked that morning, never yellowed, never soft at the blossom end. 3 tablespoons salt to 1 quart water will serve, but weigh when you can. Add grape leaves for tannin. Garlic after the second day, not before if the heat is above 75. Keep them under brine with a stone scrubbed in boiling water and cooled 3 to 6 weeks, depending on weather. The crock will teach you if you visit daily. For vinegar, do not strangle the mother. Cloth, not lid, darkness, but air. Apple scraps, sugar if the fruit is poor, clean water and patience enough to let sweetness become sharpness without your meddling. If mold grows furred and coloured, throw away and begin again. If a pale veil forms and smells of fruit and acid, bless it by leaving it alone. You may be tempted to sell the old tools. Do not. A tool carries the shape of every hand that used it well. The cabbage knife, the kraut board, the ceramic weights, the hydrometer, the thermometer, all of them have served longer than most promises. Clean them, mend what needs mending, use them only when you can do so without hurry. If you are not of our blood, then hear me carefully. Inheritance is not only blood. Blood forgets. Blood sells what should have been kept. Blood turns away from thresholds. The rightful inheritor is the one who receives with reverence and answers with labour. I have no daughter living, I have no son. I have a niece who may one day have children, and perhaps one of them will hear from an old woman named Hannelore or Nora or some other softened name that food can remember hands. Perhaps not. Perhaps this letter will wait beyond all our guesses and find someone hungry enough to listen. In the yard beneath the eastern walnut, you will find a horseshoe grown into the bark placed there by my father when the roof beam was raised. It marks the side of the house that should be repaired first, because wind drives rain from that direction in spring storms. Remember this. Sentiment that does not become maintenance is only decoration. I am tired now, and the lamp is low. I have wrapped a candle made in 1881 from the last beeswax my mother rendered before her hands stiffened. Light it only when you need witness, not company. There is a difference. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Elsa Beta Margarethe Klein. April 23, 1941. Maren read the letter once without moving. By the end, the fire had burned down to a red hollow in the stove, and the morning light had shifted from the desk to the floor. Her hands rested on either side of the pages, not touching them now. She had the strange sense that the room had leaned closer while she read, not to watch her, but to hear its own name spoken after years of not being called. She read it a second time, more slowly. This time she stopped where the names gathered. Anna Katharina, Matthias, Friedrich, Caroline, Otto, Elsabetta, Hannelore. People who had lifted crocks, buried children, washed linen, paid taxes, and kept vinegar mothers alive through heat that would have ruined them in a day. The letter did not make them grand. That was its honesty. They were not grand, they were exact. They had endured by work so ordinary it became nearly invisible. When Maren finished, she folded the pages along their original creases. Not new creases, not hurried ones. She returned each fold to the place it had been waiting to close. Then she set the letter beside the leather book and held her palm over both, hovering rather than pressing, as if blessing required restraint. She did not cry, but when she stood, she had to grip the desk until the room steadied. Outside, the day had grown clear and cold, the kind of blue Texas morning that can make bare branches look drawn by a patient hand. Maren carried the smaller scrap from the envelope, the one she had not read during the letter. On it, in the same handwriting, was a rough sketch of the provision house, 2 walnut trees, the well, and the eastern side marked with a cross. She went through the back door because the letter had made the yard part of the message. The eastern walnut stood beyond the house, not at the lane mouth, but near the slope where the hill folded around the cellar wall. It was wide and weathered, with roots pushing through limestone and grass. One limb had broken long ago, leaving a scar that had rolled over itself in thick lips of bark. Maren walked around the trunk once before she saw it. A horseshoe. not hanging from a nail, not resting in a fork. It had been placed against the young tree so many decades earlier that the walnut had grown around it, swallowing the iron at both ends. Only the curved middle remained visible, rusted dark, held in the living wood like a memory the tree had chosen not to reject. Maren touched it with 2 fingers. The metal was cold. On the house behind her, the eastern roof edge sagged most deeply. The letter had not been sentimental, it had been practical even in farewell. Repair this side first. Wind drives rain from there. Remember this. She looked up at the roofline, then down at her hands, then back at the horseshoe. The day seemed to arrange itself not into comfort but into work. Inside again, she unwrapped the beeswax candle from the package Elsabeta had described. It was shorter than she expected, thick and hand-dipped. Its colour deepened from gold to brown over 60 years and more. The wick had been protected in folded paper. When she brought it near her face, it smelled faintly of honey, dust, and a summer no living person could return to. Light it only when you need witness, not company. Maren set it upright in a saucer from the shelf, not Nora's cracked one, that she left on the ledger desk. She waited until dusk because witness needed darkness around it. Through the afternoon she did small tasks, not because they mattered most, but because her body needed motions plain enough to hold. She swept the front room from back to door. She carried broken glass into a jar. She wiped the hand scale with a dry rag. She moved the tin box to the safest corner and wrapped it again. She did not open the money. She did not count it again. At sunset, the temperature dropped quickly. The sky beyond the windows turned lavender, then grey. Maren lit the stove with the same deliberate care, feeding it slowly until the iron held a low glow. Then she struck a match and touched it to the old candle. For a moment nothing happened. Then the wick caught. The flame was small and blue at the base, yellow above, steady after one uncertain breath. The smell of beeswax entered the room with almost painful gentleness. It did not smell like candles from stores. It smelled like comb, summer grass, dry wood, and hands that had worked near hives before Maren was born. She placed the candle on the ledger desk beside the folded letter, the leather book, the medal, and Nora's cracked saucer. The objects did not become holy, that would have been too easy. They became present. Maren sat on the floor with her back against the wall and let the flame do what speech could not. She began thinking of the chain that had brought her here, not as miracle, but as small hinges turning one after another. The librarian in the oatmeal cardigan who had told her the clerk's office closed at 4, the church van driver with the 2 oranges and the biscuit wrapped in foil, Dorothy Heinemann who had put $1 in her drawer for luck she did not claim to believe in, August Vogel writing a debt in his ledger as if debt could be dignified when it was witnessed honestly. There had been the bakery woman in Seguin too, adding a 2-day-old roll without making mercy perform for itself, the police station woman who had made calls and lowered her voice when there were no beds, even the brown dog who had decided not to guard the road against her. No one had saved her. That was not the truth. They had placed small stones across water, one here, one there, enough for a crossing if she kept moving and did not demand that any single stone become a bridge. If you're watching this tonight from a warm room, or from a chair where you finally sat down after a long day, you may know the kind of kindness I mean, not the loud kind, not the kind that asks to be named, the sack of food left near a door, the ride offered without questions. The person at a counter who sees your hands shaking and slows their own voice. If you have ever been carried one more step by something small, write it in the comments. Someone else may read it on a hard evening and remember that the world has not gone entirely cold. Maren watched the beeswax candle burn lower. The flame made the window glass black and turned the room behind her into a reflection. In that reflection she saw a woman sitting on the floor of a condemned provision house, wearing a coat that had slept in barns, with soot at one wrist and a letter older than everyone who had failed her. But she also saw shelves, crocks, tools, a stove drawing clean, a roof that could be repaired from the eastern side first. Before sleeping, she wrapped the letter in linen and placed it inside the leather book. She set the medal on top of the book, not as decoration, but as a guard, the cabbage knife, the hydrometer, the thermometer in its wooden case, and the ceramic weights she laid beside her blanket in a careful row. The tin box remained under the desk, hidden again, though not forgotten. She banked the fire as well as she knew how and blew out the old candle only when the wick had burned deep enough to leave a small pool of wax around itself. The smoke rose in one thin line, then vanished into the dark. Maren lay down with the heirlooms beside her, close enough that if she reached out in the night, her fingers would find wood, glass, metal, and the kept evidence of hands that had not let go. The first snow came on December 6th, thin at dawn and serious by noon. It did not fall like northern snow, not with abundance or command, but in a careful hill country manner, laying 2 inches across the dead grass, the cedar limbs, the split walnut, and the rusted tin above the entry. By afternoon the roof had begun to show its failures honestly. Meltwater found the old paths first. One drip struck the ledger desk, another darkened the lintel over the back room. Along the eastern edge, water crawled beneath the bad shingles and entered in a slow, deliberate line. Maren set jars beneath what she could catch. Then she climbed onto a chair, touched the damp ceiling beam with 2 fingers, and remembered Elsa Bater's instruction without opening the letter again. Repair this side first. She read the roof chapter in the green manual 3 times before buying anything. The first time the words stayed separate: pitch, rafter, felt, flashing, exposure, course. The second time the roof became less mysterious and more like a body with joints, membranes, ribs, and places where neglect had entered. The third time she began drawing the eastern slope on brown paper from August's store, marking its approximate dimensions in pencil. The provision house was not large, but roofs made even modest buildings feel broad when measured from the ground. She paced the length below the eaves, counted the shake rows she could see, estimated pitch by holding a board against the gable, and wrote her numbers twice. The eastern slope measured roughly 24 feet long by 9 feet from ridge to eave, not counting the shallow overhang. 216 square feet plus waste plus the patched entry roof plus whatever damage waited beneath the tin. At Vogel and Sons, August watched her do the arithmetic on the counter. "Do not buy like you are ashamed," he said. "I'm buying like I have to make it last. That is not the same thing." She bought 8 bundles of cedar shingles at $6.40 each from a stack that had been in the back shed too long for contractors, but not too long for weather. She bought 1 roll of 30-pound roofing felt for $12.85, 5 pounds of galvanized roofing nails for $3.10, 2 strips of step flashing, a small tin of roofing cement, and a chalk line whose blue powder leaked faintly around the cap. August added a claw hammer with a cracked handle to the pile, and then removed it again. "No," he said, "you need the right tool." From beneath the counter, he brought out a roofing hatchet with a square head, a narrow blade, and a gauge peg set into one side. The handle was dark from hand oil and worn smooth near the end. "This was my Uncle Martin's," August said. "He roofed barns from here to Mason until his knees went bad. He is dead now, and the hatchet has been making me feel accused from that drawer. I can't take that." "You're not taking it, you are using it." Maren looked at the hatchet, then at his face. "I will bring it back." "You had better not," he said. "A tool sulks when it gets retired too early." The skilled help arrived 2 mornings later, though Maren had not asked for any. His name was Ansel Weber, a former roofer with a narrow face, white hair under a felt hat, and hands permanently curled from gripping tools through weather. He came walking up the lane with a ladder over one shoulder, a canvas nail apron folded under his arm, and no visible interest in conversation. "August sent you," Maren said. "August talks too much. I cannot pay you." "Did I ask?" "No, sir." "Then don't answer questions I did not put to you." He leaned the ladder against the eastern wall, stepped back, judged the angle, moved it 2 inches, and nodded once to himself. They worked 11 days, not all full days, because the weather would not allow it, and Ansel would not permit foolishness. He refused the roof when frost still held. He refused it when wind came crosswise over the ridge. He refused it at noon on the 4th day, because Maren's hands had begun shaking from hunger and cold. "Down," he said. I can finish this row. Down. She came down. That was how he taught. Few words, no praise, no indulgence. He showed her how to strip the rotten shingles without tearing sound sheathing away with them. He had her stack the old wood into 3 piles: burn, salvage, and proof of stupidity. The last pile held nails driven sideways, patches nailed over rot, tin laid without proper overlap, and 1 piece of tar paper folded into a leak like a handkerchief into a wound. When they uncovered the eastern rafters, one had softened near the eave where water had entered for years. Ansel tapped it with the hatchet, listened and shook his head. Sister rafter. He made her cut a matching length of sound lumber from boards August had found in a shed, then fit it alongside the damaged rafter, tight from wall plate to upper bearing. They fastened it with 16-penny galvanized nails, staggered and angled, not lined like stitches on a foolish seam. That nail's proud. Maren looked. Pull it. She pulled it. Again. She drove the next nail flush in 3 measured strikes. Ansel made no comment, which she slowly learned was approval in its plainest form. The chalk line pleased her more than she expected. There was comfort in snapping a true line across uncertain material. Hold one end, pull tight, lift, release. Blue dust struck felt and wood, leaving a path where the next course belonged. The shingles went on from eave upward, thick end down, joints offset, each nail placed where it would be covered by the course above. Ansel showed her how the hatchet's gauge pegs set exposure without guessing, how to keep the rows honest even when the old house was not square, how water did not care what a person intended, only where gravity invited it. By the 7th day, her palms had opened in 2 places and closed again under tape. By the 9th, her shoulders had learned the rhythm of lifting, placing, aligning, nailing. The work did not become easy, it became known. At dusk on the 11th day, Ansel climbed down first and stood in the yard, looking at the eastern roof slope. New cedar lay in straight courses from eave to ridge, pale against the weathered stone, with felt tucked clean beneath, flashing, and the edge trimmed even. Maren came down after him, boots finding the ladder rungs slowly. He removed his felt hat, scratched his white hair, and put the hat back on. It'll shed. That was all. But that night, when cold rain came instead of snow, Maren sat awake in the front room and listened. The jars stayed empty. The ledger desk remained dry along the eastern wall. The old stone darkened outside and held firm within. By mid-December, the first necessary repair was no longer a hope. It was a roof. January entered through the chimney before it entered the calendar. The first hard freeze opened the truth in the brickwork. What had looked tired in December became urgent by the 2nd week of the new year. Along the upper course, bricks had spalled where water entered, froze, and pushed the fired clay apart in thin red scales. Mortar crumbled beneath Maren's fingers like stale cake. When wind came from the north, a fine powder sifted down inside the firebox and settled across the stoveplate. She stopped using the stove except for the smallest morning fires. A bad chimney was not a discomfort, it was a threat. At Vogel and Sons, August listened while she described the powder, the missing joints, and the way smoke had hesitated on damp mornings. He drew a chimney cross-section on the back of an invoice, labelling cap, crown, flue, shoulder firebrick, and smoke shelf. "You do not patch lime with Portland cement if the old work was lime," he said. "It will be harder than the brick, and then the brick pays for the argument." He sold her hydraulic lime from a torn bag kept dry in a barrel, fire clay, clean mason's sand, a pointing trowel, a joint raker, a soft brush, and a small spray bottle. The mix he wrote carefully on the paper: 2 parts sand, 1 part hydraulic lime, half part fire clay for the hotter interior joints. Water added slowly until it held on the trowel without slumping. For exterior pointing away from the heat, 3 parts sand to 1 part lime. Dampen old masonry first. Never smear the face. Pack the joint from the back forward, finish slightly recessed so rain would not sit proud. Will it cure in this cold? Slowly. How slowly? Slow enough to improve your character. The work took 3 weeks because cold refused to cooperate. Most mornings began in the 20s, 28 degrees, 26 once, 22. With frost inside the window glass and the water bottle half frozen near the door, Maren learned to warm her hands around a tin cup before touching mortar. She learned to mix small batches, because lime did not forgive overconfidence. She learned to cover fresh work with damp burlap, and then with scrap canvas, to keep it from freezing too quickly. The chimney could not be repaired all from below. Ansel lent her the ladder again, but he did not climb it. His knees would not allow it, and his pride would not discuss the matter. Instead, he stood below with both hands on the rails and gave instructions upward in sentences short enough to survive wind. Brush first. Joint deeper. Wet it again. Not that wet. Maren raked out failed mortar a half-inch, then an inch where it had turned to powder, careful not to widen joints unnecessarily. She brushed each cavity clean, misted the bricks until they darkened but did not shine, then pressed mortar into the empty places with the edge of the trowel. Her first joints were clumsy, rounded, where they should have been compact. She scraped them out before they set and did them again. Every 15 minutes her bare fingertips went numb. Gloves were too thick for proper pointing, so she worked bare-handed when detail required it, then shoved both hands beneath her arms and waited for pain to return. Pain meant blood had come back. At first she resented it. Later she welcomed it as information. Inside, she repaired the firebox joints with the fire clay mix, pressing mortar into cracks between firebrick, smoothing only enough to remove loose edges. She cleaned the smoke shelf with a brush and a bent spoon. Creosote dust came down again, not as heavily as before, but enough to blacken the rag over her nose. At night, the house was colder without steady fire. She slept in her coat, socks doubled, heirloom tools wrapped and set away from the damp. The leather book stayed inside a tin bread box August had found for her, with a packet of dry rice in a cloth beside it to pull moisture from the air. She checked it every evening, not reading recipes yet, only making sure the pages remained safe. One afternoon, Reverend Boyd from a church on the road stopped near the lane while she was on the ladder. He was a tall black man in a brown wool coat, with a hat he touched as greeting and eyes that did not pry. "Need hands," he called. "Not unless you know chimneys. I know prayers. That may be safer from the ground." He smiled once. "God keep you steady." Then he walked on. The words stayed with her through the next course of joints. By late January, the mortar had cured enough for a test fire. August came to see it, carrying no tools except a flashlight and the authority of someone who had prevented many foolish people from burning many foolish buildings. "Small," he said. "I know. Smaller than what you think small means." She laid a twist of paper, 3 cedar splinters, and 1 piece of oak no thicker than her thumb. The match took. Flame moved, smoke gathered, considered the room, then lifted through the pipe. August went outside to watch the chimney top. Maren stayed by the stove, one hand near the damper. After a minute, his voice came from beyond the door. "Clean." She stepped outside. Smoke rose straight from the chimney, pale and thin against the winter sky. No backdraft, no seepage from the joints, no dark stain opening through the fresh mortar, just smoke travelling where it had been asked to go. Maren stood in the yard with her arms crossed against the cold. August looked at the chimney, then the roof, then at her. "You are still behind in my ledger." "I know. Good people with no debts get careless." He started down the lane before she could answer. That evening she cooked rice again, this time with beans Doris from the cafe had left in a paper sack at the door without knocking. The stove held heat cleanly, the room warmed slowly, not enough to make winter vanish, but enough to move it back from her hands. The chimney had remembered its purpose. So had she. The floors waited until the chimney stopped shedding dust. Under the dirt, soot, mouse trails, and years of weather blown through broken glass, the front room boards were better than they had first appeared. White pine, wide planks, some 12 inches across, nailed with hand-cut rose-head nails, whose uneven heads caught light like small dark flowers. Several boards had cupped. One near the counter remained too soft and would have to be replaced, but most had survived under neglect the way some people survive by lying very still. Maren began with cleaning, not sanding. She swept, then swept again. She scrubbed the boards with warm water, vinegar, and a brush, keeping moisture low because wood that old did not need drowning. The water turned black twice, then grey, then the colour of weak tea. She lifted dirt from the seams with the putty knife and a broken awl Ansel had given her. Under the counter she found 2 buttons, a rusted straight pin, a peach pit, and a child's marble of cloudy green glass. She placed the marble on the window-sill. At Vogel & Sons, August arranged the sander rental from a cousin who refinished dance floors in county halls, $14 a day, cash usually, but August wrote it into the ledger without ceremony. "You get 1 day at that rate," he said. "After that he will want money." "I can do it in 1 day." "No, you cannot." "I can try." "That is different." The random orbit sander came in a black case with 3 cords, a dust bag, and a warning label half peeled away. August sold her sanding discs in 80, 120, and 20 grit, then added a packet of earplugs. "You ever use one?" "No." "Do not tip it. Do not bear down like you are punishing the floor. Keep it moving. Let the grit work." The first pass with 80 grit felt like waking something that had been sleeping under a thick skin. The machine growled in her hands, stronger than she expected, trying to wonder if she lost attention. She moved with the grain, slow and overlapping, stopping often to empty the dust bag into a metal bucket outside. The dust smelled of old pine, soot, and the faint sweetness of resin buried deep in the boards. The floor changed by inches. Dark grey lifted to brown. Brown opened to honey. Stains remained, and she did not chase them all. Near the stove, a blackened half circle showed where firewood had once been dropped year after year. Beneath the ledger desk, ink had spilled long ago and entered the grain in a shape like a storm cloud. She left both. A floor without memory would have been a lie. The 120 grit pass softened the roughness left by the first. The 220 brought a surface her palm could travel without catching. She set the proud rosehead nails by hand as she went, tapping each down just enough to spare the sander, not enough to erase them. It took 2 days. August did not mention his prediction when she returned to ask for the rental extension. He only wrote the 2nd day in the ledger and handed her a paper sack with 2 biscuits inside. "For the machine," he said. "The machine eats biscuits?" "No, but stubborn women do." After sanding came oil. She chose tung oil for the first coat where water might track in, and boiled linseed oil for the 2nd and 3rd. Mixed thin and applied with rags she later laid flat outside so they would not heat and burn. August had been stern about that. Oily rags, he said, had burned more barns than lightning because people trusted what looked harmless. The first coat entered the wood almost as soon as it touched. Pine that had looked merely clean darkened into deep honey. The 2nd coat, after a 48-hour cure, drew out redder tones near the hearth, almost mahogany where old smoke had lived in the grain. The 3rd gave no shine exactly, only a low, hand-rubbed glow visible when the afternoon light crossed the boards at an angle. For 2 days Maren entered the room only in socks, stepping along paper paths. She slept in the back doorway wrapped in blankets, guarding the drying floor like a nurse guarding a patient through the vulnerable hours after surgery. Then came the bad morning. It was late January, though. The air had softened enough to smell briefly of mud. Maren woke before dawn and could not rise. Her body had been speaking for weeks in aches, hunger, numb fingertips, bruised knees, and the deep weariness of lifting more than food had restored. That morning it stopped making requests and became immovable. She lay under the blanket and watched the window lighten. There was work waiting, there was always work, a board to replace, a debt to note, water to carry, ash to empty, the recipe book still unread beyond its first pages, the crock room still half dusty, its shelves holding more questions than answers. But when she sat up, the room tilted. She lowered herself again and stayed there until the dizziness passed. After an hour, she put on her coat and walked, not toward town, not toward the well, but down to the marshy low place beyond the creek where winter reeds stood pale and broken. Water gathered there after rain, shallow over black mud, reflecting sky in torn pieces between grass. A great blue heron stood at the far edge. It was so still that at first she mistook it for a branch, then it moved 1 foot, lifting it with slow ceremony and placing it without ripple. Its body was grey-blue, narrow, deliberate, made of patience and hunger equally. Maren sat on a limestone shelf and watched it hunt. The heron did not hurry for her need. It did not apologize for stillness. It waited until the water gave movement, then struck once, clean and exact. Maren did no work that day. She ate beans cold from the pot, drank water and sat by the marsh until the light began to leave. In the evening she returned to the provision house and found the oiled floor waiting without resentment. Nothing had collapsed because she had stopped for 1 day. No one had written her up. No one had measured her worth against a schedule. The next morning she replaced the soft board near the counter. Carefully. February made the missing glass impossible to ignore. The roof shed rain now, and the chimney drew clean, and the floor held her steps with a low golden warmth beneath the oil, but wind still entered through the windows as if invited. At night, candle flames leaned, dust gathered in fresh lines along the sills. More than once Maren woke to the sound of a loose shard ticking in its frame. There were 8 windows in all, 2 narrow front windows facing the lane, 2 along the east wall, 1 high window near the back chamber, 3 smaller cellar vents set deep in stone, more window than opening but still framed with wood. Of the 8, 3 had no glass at all, only cardboard or old cloth nailed across them by someone long gone. 4 were cracked, some in clean lines, 1 in a spiderweb pattern held together by old glazing and mercy. The last window was original. August said it might be 1888, not 1788, because Texas had not arranged itself conveniently for the older date, and glass told the truth better than romance. The pane was wavy, faintly green at the thickest edge, full of tiny bubbles and distortions that bent the yard beyond it into something almost underwater. It sat in the east wall above the counter, set in a sash so weathered it seemed held together by habit. "Do not replace that one," August said. "I was not going to." "Good. I do not know how to save it." "That is a better problem." He sold her DAP 33 glazing putty, glazing points, a small diamond point tool, 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, a packet of figure-8 screws, and 2 salvaged panes cut from storm windows taken off a ranch house near Harper. The rest of the glass came from the scrap pile behind his store, where she learned to measure twice, cut once, and accept that old frames were rarely square enough to honor pride. Window work was colder than roof work in a quieter way. She removed each sash gently, labeling them with pencil marks so they would return to their own openings. Paint cracked, putty resisted. Some points had rusted into the wood and had to be coaxed out with the edge of the putty knife. She softened hardened glazing by warming it near the stove, never enough to scorch the sash, only enough to persuade. The DAP 33 came from the Candense and grey beige, smelling faintly of oil. August showed her on a scrap frame how to knead it until pliable, roll it into a rope between her palms, press a bedding layer into the rabbet, set the glass gently, and push glazing points flat every 8 inches with the putty knife. Then came the face putty, angled clean from glass to wood so water would shed outward, not sit. "Knife low," he said. "I am trying." "Try slower." She tried slower. Her first line was lumpy. She scraped it off, rolled it again and made the angle with less force. The second line was better. By the third window, her hand began to understand what her mind had been over-explaining. The sash cords took patience of another kind. The front windows had counterweights hidden inside the frames, long disconnected. Their old cords rotted to dark threads. She opened the weight pockets and found cast-iron weights resting at the bottom like sleeping fish. Each had a number stamped into it, 4, 6, 6, 4. She fed new 1/4-inch cotton cord over the pulley, tied a figure-8 knot at the counterweight, tested the lift, adjusted length, tied again. The knot pleased her. It was small, reliable, and honest about tension. A bad knot would announce itself. A good one simply held. The original east window she left for last. She removed it on a clear afternoon when the air was cold but still. The old glass trembled in the sash as she carried it to the table, both hands beneath the frame. Its putty had failed on the lower edge, and the wood had softened at one corner. She did not take the pane out fully. Instead, she supported it on folded towels, cleaned the loose putty away in small pieces, treated the corner with thinned oil, and set new glazing points only where the old ones had vanished. Through that glass the world had entered for more than a century. Women had stood at the counter and seen customers coming down the lane. Someone had watched storms build over the ridge. Someone had seen wagons, then trucks, then no one. The pane had held light across hands now gone, across jars filled and emptied, across account books, grief, weather, and the slow closing of a trade. Maren pressed the new putty in with her thumb first, then smoothed it with the knife. "Stay," she whispered, "not to the glass only." By late February, 7 windows closed properly, and the 8th, the original, remained imperfect but sound. The room changed immediately, not warmer in the way a furnace would make it warm, but held. Candle flames stood upright, dust no longer arrived in overnight drifts. The stove's heat stayed longer after the fire lowered. The last sash went back into place near dusk. As Maren tied off the final cord and lowered the window into its frame, a chickadee landed on the walnut branch outside. It was small enough to seem made from scraps, black cap, pale cheeks, grey wings folded tight against the cold. It hopped once, then twice, cocking its head toward the glass as if inspecting the work. Maren stood still. The bird tapped the branch with one foot, looked past her into the restored room, and flew away toward the creek. The window held. 2 winters later, in December of 2024, Maren opened the first crock that had completed its whole season without being rushed. Snow did not come that morning, but the air had the same held breath as snow. It pressed lightly against the windows, silvering the old glass and dimming the walnut limbs beyond it. Inside the provision house the stove burned low and clean, and the floorboards carried back the warmth in a slow, honey-coloured reflection. The room no longer looked rescued, it looked used. That mattered more. On the counter sat a 5-gallon salt-glazed crock, marked with a blue number 5, its linen cover tied with cotton twine, its stone weights washed and boiled before use. Maren had filled it 6 weeks earlier with cabbage from a farm outside Stonewall weighed after trimming, salted at 2%, packed by hand until its own brine rose over the cut leaves. She had checked it morning and evening through the first 10 days, then once daily after the souring steadied. pH strips lay in a small brown envelope beside the ledger. The final reading had come below 3.8. Safe. Sharp. Alive. She untied the twine and lifted the cloth. The smell rose with a clean brightness that filled the front room before she could name it. Salt, cabbage, winter, cellar coolness, and that honest sourness that had nothing decorative in it. It did not smell like nostalgia. It smelled like food that had done its quiet work in the dark. She removed the weights and set them on a plate. Beneath them the kraut shone pale gold in its brine. Maren took one forkful, placed it on the cracked saucer that had once been called trash, and ate standing beside the counter. The taste was exact. Not perfect. She knew enough now to know it was not perfect. A little softer than Nora's had been. Less dill than Elsabetta might have used in a cold winter batch. But it held, it fed, it remembered. She wrote the result in the ledger. December 18, 2024. Cabbage, Stonewall Farm, 2% sea salt, 6 weeks. Finished pH 3.7. Good brine, clean sour. Next batch, pack tighter at edges. Then she stood with the pencil in her hand for a long time, listening to the stove and the faint ticking of the window glass as the morning warmed. The interior had become spare, not pretty in the polished way tourists liked, but sound in the way working rooms needed to be. The roof did not leak, the chimney drew, the pine floor held a low shine where boots, broom, and time had touched it. Shelves had been repaired with salvaged pine, each one scrubbed, sanded, oiled, and labelled. The crock stood in order by size along the back wall. The vinegar bottles were washed and waiting. Linen covers hung from a peg near the stove. A scale sat on the counter, balanced and trusted. The front window with the wavy old glass bent the world slightly. as it always had. Through it, the lane appeared softer than truth, the walnut trees wavering in the cold like something seen through water. On the mantel sat the brass key. It had rested there for months before Maren learned what it opened. She had found it earlier that year while clearing beneath the third cellar step, wedged in a small oak box with a tin-type photograph from 1903. In the photograph, a young woman stood before the provision house with Maren's own cheekbones, Maren's guarded mouth, and a cabbage knife held upright in one hand. On the back, in faded ink, Elsabeta had written the woman's name and age, daughter of the founder, 25 years old, summer of 1903. The key's bow had been shaped like a cabbage leaf. For a long time Maren left it alone because not every locked thing asked to be opened immediately. There was work enough without mystery. Roof, mortar, floors, windows, food, debt, rest. A person could ruin a gift by demanding that all of it explain itself at once. But on a cold Sunday afternoon in late November, after the first batch had been packed and the Crocks were resting, she walked to the eastern walnut to check the horseshoe grown into the bark. Wind moved through the bare branches. The ground was damp beneath the leaves. She placed her fingers against the old iron curve and felt, for the first time, that the bark below it was not solid, not hollow exactly, covered. She cleared moss and leaf mould from a dark seam in the trunk where a long scar had folded over itself. Beneath the folded bark, almost hidden by ridges of living wood, was a brass plate no larger than her palm. It had gone green at the edges, but at its centre was a keyhole. Maren stood there a full minute, looking back once toward the house as if someone might tell her whether the time had come. No one did. She fetched the key from the mantel. It entered stiffly. She had to work it with patience, easing rather than forcing, until the old lock gave with a small interior click. A narrow wooden compartment opened inside the trunk, lined with tin so carefully fitted that water had not reached the contents. Within lay a folded flag and a note. The flag was small, triangularly folded, its fabric brittle but preserved, with 48 stars stitched in rows. Maren did not unfold it fully. She knew better than to put hunger for seeing above care. She carried it inside on a board, laid it on the counter, and opened the note first. The handwriting was not Elsabeta's. It was older, heavier. The ink faded toward brown. My child, if this flag is still here, then no one needed to sell it for bread, and that is mercy enough. It was given after Friedrich was named among the dead from the war in 1918, though the paper came late and the grief came early. Keep it dry, keep it folded. Do not let it become a story people wave around when they have not carried the cost. If a daughter finds this, know that the house was raised by men, but kept alive by women. Anna Katharina Weber Klein. Written for those after me, 1921. Maren read the last line twice. The house was raised by men, but kept alive by women. She placed the note beside Elsabeta's letter and did not move for a while. Outside, the walnut stood in the late light, holding its scar with the same patience it had given the horseshoe. Inside, the stove clicked. Somewhere in the back room, brine shifted softly beneath a weight. The provision house had given her another kept thing. Not loud, not glittering, not useful in any market way, but exact in its demand. Honor this. She did. On November 11th, 2024, Maren carried the 1918 medal, not the flag, to Der Stadt Friedhof in Fredericksburg. Veterans Day had come bright and windy, with cedar branches moving over old German stones and newer military markers. She had called ahead to ask where Friedrich Elise Klein's name appeared in the cemetery records. A volunteer with a careful voice had helped her find the family plot. The marker was modest. Weather had softened the carved letters, and lichen had gathered near the base. Maren knelt in the grass, cleaned the stone with water and a soft brush, and laid the medal on a folded cloth for the length of one prayer she did not speak aloud. She did not leave it there. Elsabeta had written plainly, "Do not sell this." She had not written "abandon this." Maren brought it home and placed it in a small shadow box. August helped her build from walnut scraps, with the note visible behind it and no decoration beyond the name and year. The money remained mostly where it had been, though no longer hidden under sand. She had opened an account in town after Dorothy Heinemann walked her to the bank herself and stood beside her until the forms were finished. Not because Maren needed guarding, but because some thresholds are easier crossed with a witness. The old bills and most of the coins were documented, wrapped properly, and placed in a safe deposit box under the name of the provision house, with a written instruction sealed beside them for the next one. Only a few coins had been spent. One common silver quarter helped buy the first real sack of sea salt, because Maren wanted the opening batch to be tied to what had been found without draining it. One worn mercury dime went toward postage for copies of 2 recipes mailed to a historical society in Kerrville. A buffalo nickel bought nothing. She carried it in her coat pocket for a month, then returned it to the box because keeping could be more faithful than using. Later, she spent 3 wheat pennies at the cafe, taped to the back of a note. Doris refused to call payment. The larger repairs were done from the bank accounts slowly, always written in the ledger. Lumber, lime, glass, roofing, testing the well, rebuilding the pump, food enough to stop counting every bite. A used mattress from a widow outside Harper, paid for in cash and carried by Caleb in the back of his uncle's truck. No extravagance entered the house. It would have felt like shouting in a room that had survived by whispering. By the second winter, the shop had reopened in the smallest possible way. No ribbon, no sign in the newspaper. No grand opening with balloons and people taking photographs beside jars they did not understand. Doris put an index card on the cafe corkboard near the register. Klein Daughter Provisions. Small batch fermented vegetables. Available by request. Ask Doris for mailing list. The first week, 6 names appeared. Doris wrote them on the back of a receipt and brought it to the cellar in a paper bag with cornbread wrapped in a towel. By spring, there were 19. By the next December, 43 people were on the list, though Maren filled orders slowly and turned down more than she accepted. She made sauerkraut, dill cucumbers, pepper vinegar, apple scrap vinegar, and 1 careful batch of pickled green tomatoes from a recipe that had required 3 readings before she trusted herself to begin. Every jar carried a plain paper label with the batch date, ingredients, and a line at the bottom. Keep cold after opening, food remembers hands. Most customers came through Doris, some through August, a few through the church, after Reverend Boyd mentioned during announcements that preservation was also a kind of prayer, though he did not say Maren's name from the pulpit. She preferred that. The work did not make her known. It made her located. There is a difference. Caleb came back on a wet afternoon after Christmas, taller than when he had first appeared with a splitting maul and a refusal to take money. He rode up on the same old Schwinn, though his knees had begun to look too high for it. A canvas bundle was tied across the handlebars with twine. Maren was washing quart jars when she heard him knock. "You could come in," she said through the door. "Hands are muddy." She dried her own and opened it. Caleb stood on the step in a brown jacket too thin for the weather, hair flattened by mist, cheeks red from the ride. He looked past her into the room, not with the hunger of curiosity, but with the shy pride of someone who had helped split wood for that stove and knew the warmth had a history. "My shop teacher let me use the good chisels," he said. He untied the bundle and held out a wooden sign. It was not large, maybe 3 feet wide, cut from walnut, sanded smooth, the letters carved by hand and painted dark green. Not perfect letters, better than perfect. They carried the small variations of a teenage hand learning to be steady. Klein Daughters Provisions. Daughters. Plural. Maren looked at the word until the room blurred at its edges. Caleb shifted his weight. "I can fix it if you don't like that part." "No," she said. Her voice came out rough, so she cleared it and tried again. "No, that part stays. My mother said it should. She said if women kept it alive, the sign ought to stop acting like there was only one." Maren took the sign carefully. "What do I owe you?" Caleb made the face of a boy who had prepared for that question and disliked the preparation. "My mother said no money." "Your mother says that often. She said maybe a jar when you have extra. That I can do." And maybe you could show me how to sharpen a draw knife sometime. I do not know how. August does. Then we will both learn. They hung the sign that afternoon above the front room counter, not outside yet because the weather was wet and the paint needed another coat of oil. The old sign, the one she had found face down in leaves, remained beneath the east window, cleaned but not restored beyond legibility. The two signs belonged to each other, one evidence of what had been kept, one answer from what was still becoming. Caleb stood back after the new sign was hung and nodded once with an expression that reminded Maren of Ansel Weber. "It'll do," he said. That evening, after Caleb rode away with a jar of sauerkraut wrapped in newspaper and tied inside his jacket, Maren sat at the ledger desk and opened to a blank page near the back of Elsabater's book. She had delayed this too. Not because she did not know it was required, but because writing to the future asked for a courage different from repair. A roof showed where to begin. Mortar told you when it failed. Fermenting cabbage gave pH, smell, brine, texture, time. A letter required a person to decide what part of her life was worth handing forward without decoration. She sharpened a pencil with the cabbage knife because the old pocket knife had gone missing somewhere near the woodpile. Then she set the pencil down, found a fountain pen Dorothy had given her from the clerk's office drawer, and filled it with blue-black ink. The first line had already been given. She wrote it exactly. "My dear one, whoever you are." Then she stopped. The stove burned low. The room smelled of brine, beeswax, pine oil, and cabbage in its 6th week. Outside, the walnut branches moved against the window, and somewhere beyond the lane a dog barked once before, thinking better of it. Maren looked at the words, "My dear one, whoever you are." She had not yet decided what to confess. The hospital, the carport, the hay barn, the $8, the first morning when the floor held, the bad day by the marsh, the people who had placed stones across the water, the fact that she had not been saved by money, though money had repaired the roof, the fact that inheritance had not healed her all at once, only given her work honest enough to return to. She began with the simplest truth. If you're reading this, then the house has kept one more promise than I knew how to ask of it. After that, the words came slowly. She wrote about weighing salt by the gram because guessing could spoil a whole crock. She wrote about checking brine levels before checking pride. She wrote about August's ledger and Dorothy's dollar, about Doris leaving paper bags on the step, about Caleb's sign, about Reverend Boyd's forward prayer in the cold. She wrote that tools should be used, not worshipped, but that use without gratitude was another kind of neglect. She did not write everything. The future did not need every wound in order to understand survival. Near midnight, she sanded the page with a pinch of clean salt, smiling at the old habit she had learned from the book. Not because salt dried ink better than blotting paper, though perhaps it did, but because the gesture pleased her. It made the page belong to the trade. Then she closed the book and set it beside Elsabater's letter. The house was not empty. It had been waiting. Outside, winter leaned against the stone walls, and the building held. The fermentation cellar waits. It has always waited. It waited under county notices and condemnation stamps. It waited beneath cedar leaves and rusted tin. It waited while tourists passed through town looking for brighter stories. It waited while the crocks gathered dust, while the recipe books slept in oiled muslin, while a flag lay folded in a walnut tree, while a dollar bill sat in Dorothy Heinemann's desk drawer marked by no official record. Dorothy still kept that bill there. Maren saw it once when she came to file a small business form and the clerk opened the drawer for a stamp pad. The bill lay in the same narrow compartment. Flattened now, its corners softened from being touched. "You still have it," Maren said. Dorothy did not look down. "I keep records," she said. Maren smiled, but only a little. Outside the courthouse, Fredericksburg moved through another ordinary morning. Cars passed. Someone carried bakery boxes across Main Street. Wind lifted dry leaves along the curb. Nothing announced that an $8 deed had become a roof, a chimney, a clean floor, a shelf of living jars, a name restored by one added letter. That was all right. Some changes are not made for announcement. Some are made to be kept.